Three people stood right at the edge of the cliff, and a tense atmosphere pulsed heavily through the air. All around this place, a majestic eagle circled around, carefully watching exactly what was happening down below. Two cultivators wearing mischievous smiles said that in the next life he should probably be much more careful, and now he has clearly put himself in direct contact with those people. At that very next moment, the guy felt a violent, heavy blow slam into his face. This alone was more than enough to make him completely lose his balance. The young hero was now falling rapidly from a steep cliff, overwhelmed by a sudden surge of fear. The long flight seemed infinitely endless, but the eagle managed to catch him just in time, saving him from the autumn fall. After a little while, he slowly opened his eyes, and his gaze radiated incredibly powerful vibrations of energy. This energy suddenly transformed into a swirling whirlwind, concentrating tightly near the seal tower. The Grand Master of the sect took full advantage of this, and after undergoing a powerful transformation, he finally woke up. The cultivators gathered together in the hallway, happy to congratulate him on his brand new breakthrough. However, a powerful chain unexpectedly escaped from the tower. The thick clot of energy took the terrifying shape of a monstrous beast, from which the cultivators decided to hide inside the tower. Meanwhile, a massive flock of bats that was approaching its target appeared in the dark sky. The mouse gathered closely near the dark Gothic castle, where the vampires ruled supreme. Lord Gloat simply could not believe what was happening. 1,000 years had passed, and some eastern inhabitants broke out once again. It was urgent to gather all the nobility and make every effort to resolve things with the werewolves. Vladika ordered them to protect the territory and prevent a tragedy, just like 1,000 years ago. At this moment, in the Western monastery, the young nun turned to God with a sincere prayer for protection. The eagle continued to roll over the rock, destroying the hard stone with its powerful wing. It was clearly having fun. Its laughter echoed through the air, and its breathing became light and completely free. And finally, he established the very base of his strength. This discovery allowed the young hero to feel a sense of ease and soar high above the ground, seeing the world in bright, brand new colors. A loud voice was heard from one of the rocks, calling him by his name. Shifting quickly, he saw an incredible, translucent figure right in front of him. The mentor pointed out that it can take 2,000 years to build the foundation of the EU, adding that the world could completely change by that time and he will have to survive in the chaos. He looked around in utter bewilderment and wondered if 2,000 years had really passed since his last appearance. The young man thought to himself that the spiritual energy here was much weaker than in solitude. The guy was only away for 2 days, but 2,000 years had passed on the outside. Having decided to check it out for himself, he quickly left. He noticed several people just below. 2 men were standing right at the edge of the cliff. He wanted to know who they were and how they dared to create trouble within the sect. Instead of a direct answer, one of them pulled out a weapon and pointed it at the surprised hero. His companion pulled out a heavy crossbow, aiming it straight at the young man. He easily stopped the projectiles in mid-air. These people had no cultivation, and their weapons were clearly not from his time. He threw 2 powerful projectiles from his hands, which immediately rushed toward the opponents. 2 men felt the attack, but they couldn't resist it. They froze right on the spot and fell completely unconscious. He was deeply surprised. They simply died. 2,000 years ago, such a scratch would be considered a very minor injury. But now, people have become incredibly weak. The young hero looked at the other guy who was already dead. 2,000 years ago, such a scratch would be considered a minor injury, but now people can die even from this. Nearby, the phone suddenly rang. The name Jianxiu showed up on the screen. Egu was surprised as he turned this strange device around in his hands. He raised his eyebrows and opened his eyes wide. There was a formidable voice from D-Tube saying that Jianxiu would never marry a common villager like him. The guy stepped back, utterly stunned by what he heard. He thought to himself that the device had no spiritual energy, yet it could transmit sounds over thousands of miles. Looking thoughtfully at the dead man, he decided to borrow his appearance to better understand this world. He folded his hands and promised to arrange proper, dignified funerals for the unfortunate ones. If the deceased had any enemies, he promised to avenge them. provided this didn't cause any complications. At this moment, in a university city called Haizhou, angry shouts were heard on a busy commercial street. The young woman was completely outraged as to why she should marry the old man's grandson just because he saved her parents. Jian Shiru put the phone down and looked at her friend. Lin Jianxian laughed with a chuckle, saying that while they were in Haizhou, her parents wouldn't be able to influence Jian Shiru. The young woman replied that the engagement was arranged in honor of her grandfather, who had been gravely ill for the past year. Then Master Yu said that this was connected to karma, and the grandfather remembered the events of the past. The whole family pressured her to marry Yi Gu, but as soon as the beauty brings the miracle dode from Su, which cured my grandfather, everything would change. Meanwhile, he was running through the city, thinking that the deceased guy had the exact same name as him. It might make sense to join the mysterious University Zoo sect to truly understand this world. But at the very next moment, the guy felt an imminent danger close to him. As soon as he had time to dodge a huge flying boat, he gasped in surprise at what had happened. A little girl flew with her mother in a plane and said there was a flying person nearby, but the woman objected, saying that the child just plays way too much in fantasy. Egu could not contain his deep indignation as to why this flying boat did not distinguish the energy. It seems like there are many truly powerful individuals in this vast world. At that very next moment, without calculating his trajectory beforehand, he crashed directly into the window of a tiny office. The young couple, upon seeing the highly unusual washing machine outside the window, was incredibly and completely outraged. Meanwhile, the young man quickly and suddenly began to fall. After a few brief moments, he found himself on the soft ground and thought to himself that flying so irresponsibly is extremely dangerous. An entire hour passed by. The guy was lying flat on the ground, quietly reflecting on his current position. Without understanding how to proceed next, suddenly, the terrifying face of a massive wild beast appeared right in front of him. A lion growled in a deeply threatening manner, opening his mouth wide, preparing himself to grab an unwelcome visitor. At that very next moment, the little girl took off her mask and asked why the brother has been lying here for such a long time, suggesting that perhaps he has no money left. The young lady noticed and noted that he was probably very hungry, because her mother always said that people simply don't move when they haven't eaten for a very long time. He, resting against the back of his head, slowly lifted himself up and replied that he was just a little bit tired. He noticed that the child had absolutely no spiritual energy, which clearly meant that she was just an ordinary person. Flying even a short distance had exhausted him much more than the young cultivator had ever expected, at least until the guy finally reaches the stage of the soul's appearance. He must carefully listen to the master's advice and not bow down, while the girl called attention to the stranger's heavily worn-out clothes. Deciding to help the poor man, she kindly offered him a delicious hot potato for free. Emu, with a warm smile, invited her to eat together, and the girl happily and readily agreed. The cultivator just could not believe that all of this was actually happening in reality. This world turned out to be chaotic and completely unpredictable. Judging by the unique appearance of the local girls, their clothing seemed highly unusual to him. The shorts were so incredibly short that he decided, in this world, there is clearly a severe shortage of fabric. Looking closely at the little girl, he thought about how children remain so peaceful despite all the hardships. Suddenly, in the far distance, the alarmed voice of a woman was heard calling out to her daughter by her name. A madame appeared, and with great concern asked exactly where Yin had disappeared to, because she was deeply worried about her. Yin ran quickly toward her mother, and Igu gently advised the girl to be very careful. At that very next moment, one of the men standing right beside the woman resolutely approached Igu and tried to hit him. The stranger suddenly grabbed the young man by his head, then locked his hand with a deadly crushing grip. The man executed a painful technique, and he was completely numb for a brief moment. The guy arrogantly noticed that he was attacking unexpectedly and dishonestly, concentrated his energy, and made a powerful forward breakthrough. With a sharp, sudden movement, he threw the enemy to the side and left him far behind. His feet slid easily and smoothly across the ground. Each step was reflected in the earth through a distinct vibration. The woman asked what on earth was happening and why Ju had started a fight without even understanding the situation. Yin exclaimed with absolute enthusiasm that the brother was incredibly strong. The girl explained that she had found a guy lying on the ground and offered him some food. The woman asked what on earth was happening and why Ju had started a fight without even understanding the situation. Yin exclaimed with absolute enthusiasm that the brother was incredibly strong. The girl explained that she had found a guy lying on the ground and offered him some food. The madam firmly ordered Unu to apologize to the young man because he had done nothing wrong. The man stepped forward, apologized, and explained that he was simply worried about the young lady. The girl's mother thanked Igu for taking care of her daughter and handed him a small envelope as a token of gratitude. A black car drove up and the driver said that she can sit inside. Yin went over to her new friend and shook his hand upon parting. He realized that this child has a strange disease, but this can be easily fixed. He rummaged through his pockets and pulled out some candy, holding it out to the girl. With a gentle smile, the guy added that if she feels bad again, this sweet treat will surely help. After a moment, they said goodbye to each other, and the girl climbed into the car. The driver reminded the lady that the recording of the miraculous Dr. Su is scheduled for right now, and if they hurry up, they might make it on time. The madam noticed an unusual candy in her daughter's hands and offered to throw it away, but Yin asked to keep it for herself and play with it for a while. The woman gently relented, hoping that her daughter's illness would end very soon and the miraculous doctor could cure her completely. The girl suddenly felt strange and froze for a few seconds. At that very next moment, the child began to fall forward. Her mother screamed in pure panic. The woman urgently asked the driver to hurry up and deliver them to the doctor as soon as possible. The girl was lying on the back seat and suddenly remembered Igu's words, that if she felt bad, she needed to eat the pill. Soon the car drove up to the modest cabin of Dr. Su, which was covered by thick, dense trees. This healer was well known for his divine gift to treat people with the help of a heavenly touch. The doctor, who was busy with his notes, was suddenly alert when he heard the approaching footsteps at the entrance. An alarmed woman rushed into the room, holding her weakened daughter in her arms and begging for immediate help. Su asked Madame Wang not to panic and assured her that he would treat the sick child. The old man placed the girl on the sofa and carefully examined her condition. A few minutes later, the doctor, with a heavy sigh, said that he could not help and advised her to prepare for the worst. These words completely shocked Madame Wang. Her hopes for her daughter's recovery collapsed in an instant, and tears streamed from her eyes like a river. The woman fell to her knees and prayed to the doctor to save her precious child. For this, she was entirely ready to sacrifice her own life. Su, thinking for a moment, said that the only thing you can do is ease the girl's suffering. Only the 9 Revolutions restorative pill, whose exact recipe was lost 2,000 years ago, could help. The girl lay on the sofa, and suddenly, the sweet candy he gave her began to exude a wonderful, magical aroma. The doctor caught this scent. He possessed half of the ancient pill recipe, and for a moment wondered if it was possible to restore it completely. Looking at the glowing candy that fell from her hands, Su realized that its shape and aroma perfectly matched a description in ancient texts. This was their only chance of salvation, and it was impossible to lose it. The healer carefully took the pill in his hands, closely studying its shape and a delicate aroma that resembled an ancient, divine medicine. Madame Wang was surprised. She remembered how she met a young man who gave her this candy, saying that it could help her daughter. Su muttered thoughtfully that it could indeed be the very same restoration pill. These words brought back hope to the unfortunate mother that her daughter would recover and get well. But unexpectedly, Su smiled ever so slightly because the appearance of a magical medicine here is clearly not a common occurrence. The doctor raised his hands to the heavens and said that it is divine intervention, a true rarity that few can ever witness. That who gave this pill could perhaps be a divine being descending to Earth just to experience human life firsthand. After the medical procedure was completed, the doctor strictly warned that the young girl needed absolute peace and quiet in order to fully restore herself. That who gave this pill could perhaps be a divine being descending to Earth just to experience human life firsthand. After the medical procedure was completed, the doctor strictly warned that the young girl needed absolute peace and quiet in order to fully restore herself. Madame Wang thanked him with deep tears welling up in her eyes, but the healer kindly replied that it was not him she should be thanking at all, but rather the young man who had given her the pill in the first place. Su then asked Madame Wang if she could please show him that mysterious young man because he simply would not calm down until he finally uncovered his secret. However, the woman had absolutely no idea where to find him. The guy, having clearly noticed Yin's sudden illness, had given her a special medicine. The mere thought that the precious pill could have been thrown away made her completely shudder inside. Su thoughtfully suggested going directly to Yizhou University, where they had previously met a young man who might be studying there. The woman strongly supported this idea and stated that she absolutely needed to go to the university immediately to find this specific guy and thank him properly. The doctor assumed that the young man was probably hiding himself under the casual appearance of an ordinary student, and he decided to help keep this person's true identity a complete secret. Madame Wang also thought to herself that a guy who is ready to give away a pill of the absolute highest quality with such profound calmness could not possibly be just a common person. Her family definitely should strengthen this relationship as much as possible. Meanwhile, Yu quietly walked along the lively and bustling city street. Suddenly, the phone rang inside his pocket once again. Ever since his very last call, the device had remained entirely silent for a very long time, but now it suddenly came back to life. On the other end of the line, they informed him that the people sent right after him had completely lost his trail, but the village chief had somehow found out about his arrival in Haizhou. The voice on the phone felt painfully familiar to him. Completely surprised, he raised his eyebrows. From the receiver, it was reported that Aunt Zhou is currently in Haizhou and is warmly inviting him over to dinner. The guy's lips trembled slightly, and his eyes instantly filled with tears. Vivid memories of the past suddenly rushed back into his mind. This voice instantly reminded him of his master's beloved wife, who had spent a lot of time with him since his early childhood. The young man promised to come over for dinner and, still deeply moved, finished the conversation. At first, he had met a guy with the exact same name, and then he suddenly heard a voice so incredibly similar to that of his mentor's wife. Whether it was just a pure coincidence or perhaps part of something much bigger. Before leaving, the mentor had left behind some items that were carefully stored in Wanbaolu. Maybe he could find some real answers there. With these thoughts in mind, he went straight to Zhang Junhua Villa, where, according to his information, Aunt Zhou should have been staying. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiaorou was riding a llama along with her close friend and discussing the upcoming arrival of Yiwu, whom her mother had invited. Lin Shanshan noted that none of the local boys could ever compare to Zhen San. Zhang Xiaorou energetically shook her friend, reminding her that this guy is actually the president of the student council at ID University and the main star athlete of the school. Their little bickering was suddenly interrupted by a stranger who unexpectedly appeared right at the door and asked if her Aunt Zhou was at home. This guy at least looked quite handsome, but he was dressed very simply. Therefore, Zhang Xiaorou decided not to go out to meet him. The girl came up with a sudden idea of calling King Leo to scare away the uninvited guest. Lin Xiangshen warned her that Leo could seriously hurt him, but the young woman just laughed it off and unleashed the wild beast. The lion rushed toward the stranger with a fierce growl, showing its teeth in a highly threatening manner and sharpening its claws. However, the young woman pointed out the right direction to teach a proper lesson to the one who needed to be taught. The beast ran at an incredible speed, leaping forward with a loud growl. But he remained absolutely calm, stood his ground firmly, and did not move an inch. Even when the lion got dangerously close and opened its terrifying mouth, the young man stood his ground courageously. Jing Xiaorou watched what was happening with great anxiety, without looking away for a single second from the place of the fight. However, completely contrary to all expectations, he simply leaned down and gently pet the animal. The guy had fully expected that mountain gods or powerful demons would be found in these mysterious places, and it turns out there is only a common dog here. Suddenly, distinct footsteps were heard right behind him. Turning around, he saw a woman with a bright, joyful smile. She greeted him and immediately found out that right in front of her stood Yiwu. The guy was completely perplexed. Standing before him was a woman who looked exactly like his master's wife. This exact circumstance had him thoroughly confused. The woman noticed his embarrassment and gently reminded him that he could just call her Aunt Zhou, exactly as he used to do during his childhood. Yiwu noted her truly astonishing resemblance to the master's wife She possessed the exact same voice and even the same facial features. While he was thinking, Jiang Xiaorou ran toward the woman and happily hugged her mother tightly. The girl said that the stranger had invaded their territory and attacked King Leo, describing him with the least flattering expressions possible. However, the woman gently tapped her daughter and sweetly scolded her for her sheer rudeness. She remembered that when Jiang Xiaorou was very little, she constantly ran right after Yiwu, calling him Guge. The girl was shocked to discover that this guy was actually her old acquaintance. The aunt added that, as a little child, Jiang Xiaorou even played house and declared that she would marry him in the future. Having said this, the woman hurried into the house, remembering that she had many things to do. Jiang Xiaorou greeted him with a brief smile, but then she walked away with obvious displeasure and left. The girl warned him not to come any closer and emphasized that if it weren't for her mother, she wouldn't have recognized him at all. For some time, he stood there deeply lost in his thoughts. Every single smile and look from his Aunt Jo reminded him of the master's wife. He firmly decided that he would treat them exactly like his own family. Having made this important decision, the young man went further ahead, following the young sister mentioned before. But suddenly, he felt a powerful flow of sinister energy right beneath his feet. At first, it seemed completely incredible. Then the guy realized that he was sensing the distinct trail of the Yin Bloodbone demon. He figured that the formation had started about 18 years ago, relatively recently. This was a clear attempt to steal the strength of his master's family and also force his entire family to suffer deeply. However, the one who started this process didn't even know the proper foundations. Therefore, everything is not really that complicated. Yiwu decided that if they are the exact same people who were behind this 2,000 years ago, they will not be a problem for him at all. Jiang Xiaorou, noticing his visible confusion, suggested that, for a village guy, everything that happened must look entirely incredible. Yiwu silently agreed that this is true. This area hides many deep secrets within itself. The girl offered to tell him the history of this building, which was truly impressive. It turned out that 18 years ago, her grandfather invited a feng shui master who completely changed the energy of the land right here. Soon after, the economy began to collapse and wealthy people started to settle down in the area. Holding a piece of paper in his hands, he thought that this feng shui master was clearly very strong. Despite his own doubts about such practices, he still decided to keep this valuable information in mind. Meanwhile, the young girl smoothly continued her story. She added that shortly after changing the overall energy of the land, her grandfather suddenly felt terribly ill and the master miraculously saved his life. He frowned deeply, remembering that exactly 18 years ago, he himself had changed the energy of the earth. The entire coincidence seemed highly suspicious. Perhaps this specific feng shui master was directly involved in everything that was currently happening. Right behind them, the distinct voice of a servant was heard, saying that dinner was completely ready and warmly inviting both the mistress and the master to the table. The young woman walked toward the entrance with a magnificent, elegant stride, while the boy quietly stayed back. Yiwu thought to himself that perhaps everything would work out fine over time, and he decided to be much kinder to this family because his master's wife had always been a perfect example of care and deep tenderness for him. After lunch was over, Jiang Xiaorou collapsed onto her bed, feeling a truly terrible fatigue. She stated that he was nothing but an intriguing schemer who openly flattered her mother at the dining table, and that he probably had some hidden motives. Lin Xiangxian offered to stay completely away from the house and join Professor Van's scientific research team, since Jiang Xiaorou would not be able to return home for a full 6 months anyway. The girl considered this to be an absolutely excellent idea. She was going to contact the professor immediately and agree to join his team, after which she planned to give the servants a vacation and leave only one behind in the house. Her friend doubted this slightly, remembering that the villa's maintenance costs a great deal of money, and it is difficult to imagine where they will find such substantial funds. And outside the window, meanwhile, he said goodbye to Aunt Jo, carefully escorting her to the waiting car. He handed her a familiar medicinal pill, saying that its unique properties would greatly help Grandpa Yan. Yiwu opened the car door to assist the lady properly. The madame thanked him genuinely, climbed into the vehicle, and said goodbye. The guy decided that tomorrow he would head over to Yizhou University. As soon as the car disappeared from his sight, he went back inside the house. Suddenly, the young hero felt an approaching danger. It was the unmistakable intention of murder. Several strong individuals met at Jiangjun Villa and were fully prepared to complete their dark task. They expected to kill him swiftly and claim their prize. This time, they absolutely had to kill the guy. You just need to wait a little bit inside the shelter, and soon the people came down to the ground. Yiwu had already sensed the presence of his enemies even before they got close. The attackers rushed forward aggressively. Their footsteps merged into a single heavy rhythm, and in their eyes, the greedy fire of hunting down their victim was burning brightly. Awu rushed to flee with every ounce of strength he had left. The leader gripped a long knife in his hands, whose sharp blade gleamed sinisterly, creating terrifying reflections. And he was preparing to deliver a crushing blow, and at the very next moment, a cruel enemy skillfully threw a sharp dagger right in his direction. Sensing the immediate danger, the young man ran forward quickly, trying hard to dodge the attack. But the knife hissed through the air and almost struck his shoulder. The rest of the men also armed themselves with knives and began to surround him in a highly coordinated manner. They all gestured, preparing to drive the weapon deep into the target. The young man found himself in a tight ring of opponents. Their evil looks left absolutely no doubt about their intention to kill him at all costs and complete their task. The hero stood his ground, carefully reflecting on his very next step, intensely analyzing the situation and realizing that a single mistake could easily be his last in this deadly game. The terrible mercenaries noted that at the university, there wasn't enough courage to kill anyone on Haizhou territory. They came to the conclusion that the absolute best way out for the young man was to surrender immediately. One of the villains declared sarcasticamente that he looked far too scared and pale to even be considered a proper adult. The man offered him two choices: either get down on his knees or commit suicide. With a petulant smile, the criminal continued to state his conditions. But suddenly, the young man vanished, forcing the others to look around with complete perplexidad. It was so completely unexpected that one of the henchmen even thought the enemy had simply evaporated into thin air. The leader thought to himself, someone who could kill his two best fighters must possess a truly outstanding power. Realizing that the enemy could be extremely dangerous, he ordered his people to divide up and thoroughly search the woods, looking into every single crack and isolated spot. This sudden disappearance deeply alerted the criminals. The leader decided to use the secret device to track down the fugitive. However, looking closely at the device, he was utterly astonished that the arrow pointed directly at him. The leader felt a cold shiver run straight down his spine, right behind the glowing, truly scarlet light in the palm of his hand. At the very next moment, the young man quickly landed a powerful blow, which struck the enemy hard and forced him to collapse onto the ground. Everything happened so fast that the criminal didn't even have time to realize he was trapped. He leaned over the defeated enemy and demanded an explanation as to who sent the mercenaries and for what specific reason they were hunting him. The boss was absolutely furious, realizing that his people were also captured. They didn't manage to escape or transmit any information. He thought anxiously to himself that this young man's skills are far superior to the level of many martial artists. It is probably best to completely hide this failure and not tell a single soul. Suddenly, the leader was hit by a severe attack of sharp pain, and he grabbed his chest as he felt his body become paralyzed. His subordinates began to choke and cough up blood, being fully under the influence of the magical power. He watched everything that was happening with an icy calmness. Toxic suicide, the final step of a well-trained detachment. It's not every day you get to meet such dangerous opponents. With a heavy sigh, the young man thought to himself that he would have to train even harder. These killers were clearly not just simple thugs, but their employer was a true criminal genius. But first, it was necessary to head to the university. He gathered his magical energy and stood up smoothly. After shaking his hand, he left a bright flash of magical charge behind him. The guy decided that he was fully becoming a student of the sect. He could deeply understand the secrets of this entire era. A group of people gathered inside a dark corridor with tightly closed doors. Their boss stated carefully that it was absolutely urgent to find the exact location of the black group, since there had been no news from them for far too long. After verifying the information, the subordinate stated that the life signs of 5 individuals from the black group have completely disappeared. This could only mean one single thing: everyone was dead, and the exact reason for their death still remained a complete mystery. According to the data obtained directly from the drone, clear traces of a struggle were discovered at the exact site of their sudden disappearance. But absolutely no other evidence could be found there. The commander frowned deeply, feeling a sudden flash of intense anger. Such an unexpected turn of events was completely unacceptable to him. He stood up abruptly, slammed his fist hard on the table, and unleashed an angry tirade upon his subordinates, accusing them of utter stupidity and complete inability to cope with the assigned task. The men quickly took a step back, but a powerful magic blast of force made them shake entirely. The captain cast a harsh, stern look at the team and immediately ordered them to find someone much more suitable who could actually finish this job properly. At that exact moment, he had already arrived at the university. He quickly stepped out of the bus, looking around at the noisy, bustling streets of the new world. The young man thought that his current level of strength would be enough to protect him in this world, but he did not expect the weapons of ordinary mortals to be so incredibly dangerous. Having decided to hide his unique abilities for the time being, he understood that a direct clash with these iron monsters and iron serpents could easily end deplorably. A man walked past him who suddenly staggered and almost fell to the ground. Iwu immediately stopped short and noticed that he needed urgent assistance. However, other passers-by indifferently warned that he was probably just a scammer and that it is always better not to approach such a young man. Iwu could not believe that people in this world had become so cold and completely indifferent to the problems of another person. Remembering the wise words of a master who always spoke about the great importance of helping the weak, he firmly decided to follow this pact. The young man pulled out a healing pill and handed it to the man. He can probably consider himself quite fortunate, as he had very good luck. The gentleman sat down, leaning against the wall, and gradually came back to his senses, feeling a deep healing effect. After that, he continued on his way as he finally threw a sharp comment at the girl in the crowd that people should really be kinder to one another. A man who had fallen ill sat there for a while, but he was already feeling much better. Suddenly, the subordinate approached him and whispered something quietly. The patient abruptly opened his eyes, and a strange, unusual light flashed in his gaze. The subordinate anxiously asked how his master was feeling. Upon hearing the reassuring answer, he calmed down peacefully, suddenly feeling a great sense of relief. The man said that until just recently he was right on the verge of fainting, but someone had given him an incredible pill. Waking up, he realized that he was completely healthy, as if he had experienced a miracle. Such a miracle should definitely not be left without a proper reward, despite the fact that the benefactor did not state his name. The man firmly decided to find him and thank him deeply for his kindness. Meanwhile, the bright sun was shining beautifully over Yizhou University. The playful swallows were fluttering happily in the air. Jiang Xiaoro sighed with deep relief, telling her friend that she was finally able to escape from that annoying village. Lin Xianxian noticed that a brand new student will appear in their class today, and with a smile she added that she highly expects to see a handsome man. After a few brief moments, the teacher entered the office and asked the students to calm down in order to get familiar with the newcomer. The woman introduced the new student, and Jiang Xiaoro thought he looked remarkably familiar. The girls spoke in low voices, assuming that this guy looked exactly like Iwu. The teacher suggested that the newcomer introduce himself and therefore become familiar with the class. The young man calmly stated that his name is He Baichuan, deciding to go by this name. Jiang Xiaoro mentioned that she really likes guys who remain cool and say very little. Lin Xianxian teased her friend with a knowing smile, pointing out that she was still clearly in love with her high school student and offered to leave the new guy to her. Meanwhile, the teacher wondered exactly where to seat the new student. Jiang Xiaoro thought to herself, although both had the surname He, his name definitely sounded much better. Lin Xianxian raised her hand, offering a free spot right next to her. The woman turned to Jiang Xiaoro and asked what she thought about this. A bit embarrassed, she admitted that she wanted to sit right next to the newcomer. As a result, the teacher allowed him to choose a spot for himself where it would be most convenient for him. The guy walked along the desk as if he were about to sit next to Lin Xiangxian. The young woman was absolutely delighted, but unexpectedly he made a completely different decision. At the very last moment, the boy chose a completely unknown girl and sat right next to her, leaving everyone quite surprised. A friend of Chu Sanyan noticed that Zhang Xiaorou was clearly interested in the newcomer. Iwu glanced furtively at his new desk neighbor. The girl met his gaze, looking a bit embarrassed. When the lesson finally ended, the students began to disperse. Iwu also went out, but in the corridor, the young man bumped into a group of arrogant guys. One of them, with a smug smile, declared that at Yizhou University, he was studying under Yu, the absolute best, so it was wiser not to cross his path. One of the hooligans walked up and, waving his finger right in front of Yiwu's nose, warned him to stay completely away from Zhang Xiaorou. Yiwu calmly promised that he wouldn't even look in her direction, and would gladly stay 1,000 kilometers away. The guy thought that this Jishan was being far too self-important, and decided to teach him a little lesson, concentrating a magical fireball directly in his palm. The spell quickly flew toward the unsuspecting Jishan. After a brief moment, the boys who were recently laughing suddenly screamed in panic, begging him to please put out the burning hair. The young man slowly walked out into the street, stepping along the sidewalk and reflecting deeply on recent events. He came to the conclusion that even half of his strength is already enough to protect him, because why try to look strong in a world where almost nobody possesses cultivation? Suddenly, he decided that the absolute best way to understand this era was to go to the library and read books about the modern world. Meanwhile, Lin Xiangxian pointed out that the guy completely ignored her invitation, choosing a spot right next to Gu Ting instead. She and Irene suggested that he clearly had absolutely no taste. Suddenly, the girl spotted Yiwu out on the street and decided that he might want to speak with one of them. The young man noticed the girls, but continued moving forward, not wanting to start a conversation at all. A bird soared high into the sky, slowly cutting through the air with powerful strokes of its wings. Suddenly, a small gift broke free from underneath its tail. It quickly closed the distance and with a quiet slap, landed directly on his boot. The young man lowered his irritated eyes, clearly not expecting this at all, but it would be a mistake to walk around in this condition. Zhang Xiaorou was surprised to notice how the guy dropped down on one knee. This completely confused her. Lin Xianxian excitedly declared that the guy probably wants to confess his love to her friend. The embarrassed Zhang Xiaorou left hastily, saying she was far too young for a relationship. Yiwu carefully looked at the trace of the bird gift, deciding that the girls had completely misunderstood the situation. He didn't even have a flower to make confessions with. At that moment, Jishan, filled with rage, slammed his fist onto the table. Nobody had ever dared to humiliate him like that before. He was boiling with anger. Yiwu, who used to beg for mercy, was now blatantly flirting with Zhang Xiaorou. It was unthinkable. The guy had truly earned a punishment. Dark figures lurked quietly in the shadows, closely watching every single step of the young hero. The library where he was heading was far too crowded, so they decided to wait for the perfect moment. Jishan, tightly holding a sharp, gleaming knife in his hands, swore quite sadly that he would deal with Yiwu, who would never actually dare to approach his beloved goddess. Meanwhile, he was over at the library, carefully studying books about ancient cultivation methods. It seemed to him that over the course of 2,000 years, they had become far too complicated. Suddenly, the young man noticed some very old symbols on the straps. They seemed surprisingly familiar to him, visibly exuding the powerful, heavy aura of antiquity. These inscriptions could easily indicate texts about the specific methods of cultivating the level of Yuan or Jovarillo. Suddenly, the young man noticed some very old symbols on the straps. They seemed surprisingly familiar to him, visibly exuding the powerful, heavy aura of antiquity. These inscriptions could easily indicate texts about the specific methods of cultivating the level of Yuan or Jovarillo. The girls laughed quietly, looking at this strange young man. They decided that the guy was actually quite amusing, since he went out of his way to read ancient text messages. But their sudden laughter was completely interrupted by a sudden teacher wearing a strict suit, instantly attracting everyone's attention with his sheer seriousness. Inside the library, an uncomfortable, stressful silence reigned, abruptly broken by the stern voice of Professor Van, who strictly ordered them to comply with the rules. This place was strictly destined for reading, and definitely not for loud conversation or empty laughter. The professor had come to prepare for his upcoming project and find some ancient documents when he suddenly noticed that the door to the archive room was wide open. The guard admitted rather embarrassedly that he had stepped out for a short while and completely lost sight of the offender. At that exact moment, he was enthusiastically considering the ancient books. He found a partially damaged text about the different varieties of fist fighting. But right before he could actually read it, the guard suddenly appeared and demanded that he immediately abandon the room. The man stated that a simple student has absolutely nothing to do among ancient sacred manuscripts, which even Professor Wong himself does not fully understand. However, to everyone's absolute surprise, the professor quickly stopped the guard. Wong looked very carefully at the young man. His face seemed remarkably familiar, but the professor just could not recall exactly where he saw him. But after a brief moment, the master reproduced in his memory that specific morning when he had suddenly fallen ill. The professor once more looked intently at this unusual student. This guy strongly reminded him of the very same benefactor who had given him a wonderful, miraculous pill, confirming his sudden suspicion. He strictly ordered the guard to apologize to Iwu. The security guard, hanging his head low, tried to make some excuses but was ultimately forced to apologize. The guard immediately called attention to the student who had behaved far too defiantly and had clearly violated the peace. The rest of the students were completely exhausted, in anxious anticipation of how this tense scene would finally end. But suddenly, the professor suggested verifying whether he could actually read the ancient text. Iwu quickly realized that he was in a very difficult situation, but he was certainly not going to lose face. Having read the text thoroughly, he slowly ran his gaze across the lines and tried to catch every single detail. As the guy began to read aloud, a soft, gentle blue light noticeably thickened around him, confidently describing the intricate technique of combat methods. The young man intuitively recreated the missing fragments. Professor Wong listened with wide-open eyes and simply could not believe it. Every single word perfectly coincided with his own research, but even Wong himself had never achieved such incredible precision. Others began to close in, fully realizing that the young man could truly read ancient documents. When Ewu turned around and saw how everyone was talking, he asked what was happening and why everyone was so alarmed. At that very moment, the professor staggered as if he were about to pass out. He recognized in him the man who had recently given him a pill. Logic suggested that after taking that pill, a common person becomes much stronger than a massive elephant. The young man quickly guessed that the professor was merely pretending to be weak to draw another pill out of him. Having decided not to delay the situation any further, he referred to some urgent matters and hastily walked out of the library. Professor Wong called the guard over and asked what book this strange student had taken. The guard handed him the red book with the peculiar title of Picnic Conmigo. The professor looked at the book with great surprise. Perhaps this student possessed some hidden ulterior intentions. Since he took such a simple book, he decided to study it himself in order to fully understand what the boy had conceived. Meanwhile, the young man walked outside. It heavily seemed to him that someone was closely watching him. The rising feeling of anxiety was far too clear to simply ignore. Suddenly, he realized that several different groups were looking for him right away. This was clearly not just a simple coincidence. The guy smiled rather grimly, realizing that this was actually a good time to start the game. He felt that it was finally time to have a little fun. A bit of time passed by, and the dark twilight sank deeply into the sky. The thick darkness completely filled the streets with a cold wind and a strange, eerie silence. He, looking around with impatience, called out to the criminals who had been following him all this time and offered to take a short break. His voice sounded perfectly calm, but he felt a hidden threat. The bandits looked at one another and could not understand how they had been discovered so quickly. Perhaps this guy really had some unusual abilities. Waving a sharp dagger, one rushed forward, shouting that it was high time to finish off this insolent fool. Before he actually managed to attack, something entirely unexpected happened. Another rival group suddenly attacked them. The unknown people wearing masks moved in very quickly, preparing for a decisive blow. Terrified, Jishan turned around in horror, fully realizing that he himself was now the victim of a sudden attack. One of the attackers jumped right over Jishan, trying to hit him hard with his foot. Jishan barely managed to dodge it, but he did not have enough time to get away safely and received a powerful attack from which he flew much further forward. He observed what was happening in complete surprise, trying to figure out who these people were and why they had pursued him ever since he left the university grounds. Perhaps their relentless attacks would never end. The bandits loudly demanded that they return some things to them, but the guy did not even understand what was being discussed. Keeping his absolute calm, the young hero growled softly and looked around at his opponents. And after a brief moment, he rose into the air and began to fly above the ground, effortlessly avoiding the attacks. In vain, the villain fully intended to strike the young man with a knife. He had no success whatsoever. One of the masked bandits screamed a loud order to his people to stop the young man at all costs. However, in the very next moment, a binding chain of magical energy tightly closed around the attackers. Iwu raised his hand and the bright light illuminated his face. He looked quite contemptuously at his restrained enemies. The guy calmly declared that the powerful man who was behind the attack against the Junghwa villa probably wanted to destroy the entire family of his master. Up until this point, he was thinking about how to break their plan, but today, the bastards themselves came directly to him. It was the perfect moment to use them in his own interests. The young man cast a magical weapon downward. The energy poured out sharply with its intended purpose, and with lightning speed, it fell directly upon the skeleton, which immediately flickered. Without turning around, he left, and right behind him, a glowing, brilliant flame suddenly exploded, illuminating the dark, gloomy street. At that exact moment, the gray-haired sorcerer instantly felt that his magical formation had been completely destroyed. He breathed heavily, without believing in what was actually happening. Just a second before the man finally turned around. A student named Lon said that they must go at once to Ajo and discover what had happened there. The magician with a dark suit shot up over the city, anxiously examining all the surrounding areas. He saw that the battlefield was totally destroyed and suggested that the attacker destroyed all of the witnesses. Meanwhile, he was walking down busy, crowded street, fully enjoying the pleasant night air. Suddenly, he sneezed and thought with a slight smile that perhaps someone beautiful was remembering him right now. A short guy with a mustache was walking towards him, and therefore, an accidental collision suddenly occurred. A strange passerby crashed right into a young man. In the very next moment, the guy fell to the ground, and Iwu looked with surprise at the sudden man. The fat man stood up in silence and did not even bother to apologize for what had just happened. He seemed arrogant and harbored his inner anger due to an unexpected collision. Suddenly, the stranger accelerated, waved his hand, and quickly ran forward. It seemed that his actions were far too strange for a simple passerby. Feeling how his pockets had been suddenly slashed, he was fully aware that this guy was not a simple person. This is an insolent thief who stole his wallet, in which there should have been a lot of money. To the great disappointment of the thief, the wallet was empty. The guy, whose name was Zheng Haiben, was angry with himself because he had wasted his time and effort in vain. Later on, at the university's male dormitory, Aizhou walked towards his room and knocked on the door. Behind the wall, there was a question waiting there, but the guy simply did not have time to respond when the door opened. A moment later, right on the threshold, the very same thief suddenly appeared on the threshold. He immediately recognized him and was a bit surprised by such a coincidence. For several minutes, they just stared at each other. The neighbor seemed a bit embarrassed. He was confused and squinted at the young man, but Iwu decided to pretend that nothing had happened. In the end, they had to live together in the exact same room. Presenting himself a second-year philosophy student, he smiled kindly and explained that he was stationed precisely in this dormitory. Learning that this guy was now his neighbor, he felt an incredible shame for his past action. He decided that somehow he needed to make peace. After examining the room with curiosity, He noticed that the 21st century student dormitories looked exactly like this. Everything around him seemed quite interesting. To broaden their acquaintance, Jung Haben suggested going out to have dinner. The boys ended up on an open terrace near a university cafe and sat at a table waiting for their plate. Suddenly, Gu Tin approached them, saying that the meat was ready, and looked with surprise at Iwu. Without expecting to meet him so late here, the young man was also surprised and asked him why he worked so late. Gu Tin replied that he earned a living in this cafe, and a shadow of sadness flickered in his eyes. Meanwhile, at the next table, a formidable man called the waitress in disgust, demanding an explanation as to why the fish was not ready yet. When the girl politely apologized, the man said that apologies are completely useless. With clear contempt in his voice, he invited her to go to the hotel with him. The young girl was a bit scared, but she repeated her words that she needed to wait just a little bit. The food was almost ready. Rising up, the insolent man approached the waitress, obviously with the intention of demonstrating his superiority. The bastard grabbed Gu Tin by the hand, saying that everyone respects him, and apparently decided to neglect her. Ewu stood up calmly and decided to intervene to put the insolent man in his place. The young man resolutely grabbed the girl by the hand and dragged her away from the rude man, standing between them. The shameless man frowned and asked brusquely what was happening here, thoroughly disconcerted by how this young man dared to interfere in his affairs. Zhang Hiben advised his friend not to get emotional and to simply call the police. But he firmly responded that Gu Tin was his classmate and he could not simply sit back and watch, saying that this guy was practically asking for a confrontation. Several bandits turned towards Iwu, flexing their fists. Zhang Hiben, in a panic, grabbed his phone, deciding to call the police until his new neighbor reached his maximum limit. Meanwhile, one of the attackers waved a bottle and rushed abruptly into the attack. He remained completely calm, waiting patiently for the attacker to charge. In the very next moment, the bottle was right in Yu's face, and it seemed that it was impossible to avoid a blow. Something incredible happened. The bandit opened his eyes wide in absolute astonishment, completely unable to believe what was happening. It was a sharp, powerful blow that threw the enemy backward with his fist. The power of this blow was so great that there were several other bandits nearby. Zhang Haiben froze, observing what was happening. He could not understand how his neighbor did it so easily against a whole group of attackers. Gu Tin could not believe her eyes either. Her classmate, whom she considered an ordinary student, suddenly turned out to be a master of martial arts. Furious with such a sudden turn of events, he could not contain his rage. The villain's eyes glowed with anger, and he declared that it was very easy not to intimidate. He approached Iwu holding the knife and threateningly said that he should prepare for death, insinuating that she would not be easy. But the guy, with surprising ease, took the knife right out of his hand. The perplexed bastard fell to his knees and hurriedly began to apologize for his behavior. Gu Tin was still in a complete state of shock, but she thanked her classmate for the rescue. Zhang Haiben enthusiastically admitted that it was truly cool. Iwu looked up at the sky and pointed out that it was far too late and it was time to go home. The guy suggested keeping Gu Tin at home, and the girl happily agreed, admitting that it was still a bit terrifying. The gradual trembling in Gu Tin's body finally diminished, and she began to tell her story. They slowly walked through the city at night. The girl shared that her mother was sick and needed medicine, so she had to not only study, but also earn extra money. Although she never expected to get into such an unpleasant situation. He thought he realized that Gu Tin was very vulnerable and decided that in the future, he would definitely help her. The guy remained a bit quiet, deeply immersed in thought. Gu Tin turned around and asked what happened. The young man replied that he was just distracted, but in fact, he felt a strange, mysterious aura emanating from afar. But he decided not to say anything to the girl. So as not to scare her, they soon approached her house. Once again, he felt a powerful and concentrated spiritual energy coming from this place. It was very strange. In the 21st century, spiritual energy was an absolute rarity, but it was unexpectedly present here. The young man carefully decided that it was truly worth the effort to investigate this matter and discover much more about what was actually happening here. Right at that precise moment, a sudden gust of wind brought him a small piece of paper. There was a very curious record written on it, and its content clearly carried some highly important information. On the very next day, Xushan, along with a reckless gang of my friends, was incredibly stupid when he went into the bathroom. The completely unsuspecting guy was entirely trapped. The ruthless bandits quickly prepared a large bag to attack him. Within the very next few seconds, the bag was pulled over his head, and the heartless bastards fiercely swung their batons, fully preparing to beat him down completely. Loud, piercing screams suddenly came out from the school bathroom, which instantly attracted the attention of the people walking on the street. Quite a few people stopped right there, closely listening to exactly what was happening. The heavily beaten Jishan, barely managing to hold back his tears, desperately begged them for mercy. He swore that he would absolutely never do that again, but Iwu firmly believed that a simple, basic apology is just not enough. When the bandit asked what he wanted in return, he was slowly leaning over him with a highly conceited smile, making the unfortunate situation even more terrifying for the unlucky one. Jishan, visibly trembling with intense fear, quickly offered 1,000 yuan, desperately hoping that this would be enough. But in response, he instantly received another heavy blow. The guy forcefully struck the bastard with immense power. Did he actually think about who was standing right in front of him? The bandit screamed out loud that he was perfectly ready to pay even more if they would only just stop beating him. He, slowly leaning closely towards him, arrogantly said that he would gladly take 10,000. Completely stunned by this, Jishan could barely believe his own ears, but he quickly realized that he had absolutely no other option left. Pretty soon, the whole group from the restroom finally stepped out of the room. He thought to himself that modern people still use traditional wallets and wondered whether 100,000 would be truly enough to rent a decent house. Jishan quickly told his friends that truly smart people are never looking for trouble. He strictly advised everyone to completely forget about everything that had just happened. They urgently need to treat their painful wounds and then carefully think about the best possible way to get proper revenge on this insolent guy. Meanwhile, right in the middle of the lesson, the teacher announced that they have a brand new topic to cover. He told his girlfriend that he had noticed a notice posted on Guting's door, realizing right away that her family was actively looking for new tenants. He became quite interested and told the girl that he would really like to rent the place, adding that he even has the necessary money for the payment. Guting felt quite embarrassed and deeply lowered her eyes, completely unsure of how to respond to him. Upon seeing that the boy was totally distracted and not listening to her at all, she became absolutely indignant. She furiously threw a piece of chalk straight toward him, and a small chunk of chalk hit him right on the head. He calmly pointed out that the teacher's health is clearly completely out of order. He remarked that her yin and yang were totally unbalanced and that she seriously needed to take some proper medicine. The teacher furiously asked him arrogantly what exactly he meant by that and how he even dared to say such a thing. Just as Ewu wanted to explain himself, she abruptly interrupted him and angrily demanded that he leave the classroom immediately. The guy did not argue at all, which unexpectedly intensified the tense situation even more. So he stood up completely obediently. Saying goodbye, the young man quietly asked Guting to leave the room with him and added that he was going to study in the library. The teacher sighed deeply and heavily and calmly continued the lesson with the rest of the remaining students. All of a sudden, her phone rang with a very joyful melody. On the other end of the line was none other than Professor Wang. The woman was in a complete state of shock. Such an incredibly important person rarely calls someone personally. The professor stated that he urgently needs a student named E. Bacon in order to invite him to a major joint project. Having completely finished the phone conversation, the teacher turned back to the class with the big question of who exactly this person is. Guting quickly raised her hand and informed her that Teacher Chu literally just kicked this very student right out of the room. The woman completely froze for a long moment upon realizing that the student whom she had kicked out the door so recklessly turned out to be exactly the one Professor Wang was looking for. Realizing her own clumsy mistake after such a rash act, the teacher hurriedly rushed out into the long corridor, desperately thinking about how to fix this terrible situation right now. At that very moment, he was sitting in the library and enthusiastically studying the local literature, without even suspecting what had just happened. Teacher Chu, clutching her high heels, rushed quickly down the hallway. She was breathing heavily, deeply feeling how incredibly tired she was while running. Noticing her sudden appearance, the young man turned around in complete surprise and asked what exactly brought her here in the middle of her regular lessons. The woman, successfully overcoming her shame, politely apologized for her harsh words. It was quite uncomfortable for her, but she fully recognized her mistake. The teacher carefully explained that Professor Wang personally wants to invite Yiwu to actively participate in the project. Any person whom he points out, without a single doubt, possesses an outstanding talent. The young man listened with a bit of slight bewilderment, assuming that there must be some mistake. He simply did not understand why so much attention was being paid to him. Nevertheless, the teacher persistently advised him to go to the historical museum located in the east, but the guy's complete calm and indifference to such a proposal seemed surprising to her. Yet he only calmly said that, to begin with, he wanted to read the book, after which, maybe. Meanwhile, over at the hospital, Jishan's friends carefully bandaged their painful wounds and eagerly discussed their future plans. One of his close friends asked what exactly their boss was planning to do. Jishan confidently replied that he personally knows the leader of the local street gang. He fully plans to call him up for a major confrontation and teach a harsh lesson. All of a sudden, they saw how the measured pace of Yiwu passed right by the hospital. Noticing him, he smiled with malicious joy, deciding that now is the perfect moment to implement his plan. A few minutes later, he dialed a very familiar number and contacted Mr. Yoon, desperately asking him for immediate help. Upon hearing the name Yiwu, Yoon immediately agreed to help out. His personal interest increased notably when he discovered exactly who needed to be stopped. Yoon sharply stepped on the gas pedal. Now the absolute moment had come to act, and his loyal henchman, without even having any time to properly prepare, quickly tumbled out onto the hard asphalt. Meanwhile, Yiwu was quite surprised as he looked all around himself in search of the history museum. Jishan called the guy and aggressively said that he had stolen 100,000 from them and just wanted to escape, but that he would definitely pay dearly for his actions. He, with a mocking sneer, suggested that probably that wasn't enough for the guy and that he wants to experience the bitter taste of defeat once again. However, the enemy simply laughed and said that he had only beaten him up a single time, and this absolutely does not mean that he has now become an important figure. Even more so with Shong, who will personally take care of everything very soon. In less than a few brief moments, the loud sound of a powerful engine approaching from far away could be heard. Yoon arrogantly asked exactly where this Yiwu is, saying that it was probably high time to teach him a lesson. Jishan quickly pointed toward the boy wearing a blue shirt, who looked surprisingly calm. Yoon backed away in complete horror, absolutely unable to believe his own eyes as to why this young man was standing here. The very last time he was almost completely beaten by him, and if he clashes with him once again, the final result will be completely obvious. Perhaps Shushen is deliberately provoking him. Meanwhile, Yiwu turned around mockingly. This is probably the exact same Shong who threatened to deal with him. The guy looked completely calm and condescendingly looked all around himself. Xian angrily said that this highly impudent fellow behaves far too boldly and that they urgently need to deal with him right away. But at the very next moment, John suddenly struck his friend with immense force right on the cheek. It was completely numbed. Xian tightly clutched his burning red cheek and, in absolute confusion, asked why he was being hit like that. Meanwhile, John slowly leaned down and said that he had been completely deceived by this kid, and therefore he should forgive him. Then he strictly ordered Jishan to apologize immediately for his foolish actions. The guy was totally confused and simply did not understand what was happening. Why on earth is his friend so deeply afraid of this Ewing guy? Perhaps he is actually his secret boss. And in the meantime, he clearly declared that if John does not dare to do anything at all, then perhaps the guy himself will start a real fight. However, the deeply embarrassed Zushan immediately got down on his knees and thoroughly admitted his mistake. He was slowly leaning over the criminal, teaching him like an irrational, foolish child, and noted that apparently the last time simply wasn't enough. Then he sharply asked how this absolute villain was going to properly compensate him for the severe moral damage. Zushan could not hold back his bitter, painful tears. He would really have to pay a heavy compensation all over again. However, he swung around with visible impatience and declared that if he did not want to pay, then he had absolutely no intention to please him. The frightened Jishan, with noticeably trembling hands, quickly extended the map and said that there are another 100,000 available. He instantly felt the sudden euphoria of an easy prey. Turning around with a slight smile, the hero calmly noted that the bandits might eventually come back. Meanwhile, right between the thick foliage of the trees, a dark, mysterious figure was closely watching the young men. This guy had a couple of clever tricks up his sleeve. He was walking in complete silence down the street, slightly tilting his head, but that highly unpleasant sensation just would not leave him. Strange. Someone deliberately broke the trap that he had carefully set up in the Cloud Mist Gorge, leaving the teacher's wife in grave danger. The young man quickly hurried over there, easily flying through the open air, while the strong wind blew fiercely against his face. Meanwhile, the person who saw him immediately informed his brother that he had left. Soon enough, the young hero was standing directly above the mountain villa and looked straight down. A dull, deadly aura is still faintly floating around, but it is no longer being actively used. Who could have possibly done this? Suddenly, the young man saw something truly incredible. His eyes abruptly opened wide. Several bright red silhouettes were clearly visible across the empty space. A dangerous ambush was quite obviously arranged right here. Awu carefully scratched his chin, thinking, "This is really interesting. You must definitely solve it." Pretty soon, he went down to the ground. The enemy instantly noticed him and loudly shouted that this kid was right here, so he had to be surrounded immediately. After a brief moment, several strong men, tightly clutching sharp knives in their hands, completely surrounded him from all sides. Alone pointed out that it was pure impudence to ever come back here. The young man destroyed the formation left by the master, and yet he still dares to return. It truly seems like he does not take the master seriously at all. The man brought out his knife and asked why he destroyed the vital data. For a few brief moments, he was genuinely surprised. However, the numbness did not last very long. The young man sharply clenched his fist and firmly declared that he was not going to answer any of these questions. In less than a fraction of a split second, the young hero struck the enemy with a lightning-fast movement. He smoothly took a knife away from him and said that everyone who does not want to die should immediately get out of here. At the very next moment, a knife fell to the ground with a dull clanging sound, and the surrounding bandits completely froze in utter confusion. Taking full advantage of this, he quickly rose high up. Such absolute trash with a low level of strength has absolutely no right to even look at him. Alan screamed out in pure rage, strictly demanding that his henchmen immediately catch up with this guy and not remain idle. The bandits obediently followed the order, and after a minute, they hurriedly rushed out to search. He rushed swiftly through the sky and noticed another group of opponents, but they did not move at all. Apparently, they were waiting for him from the other side. The bandits lurking in the bushes noticed that the guy was closely approaching and prepared themselves to fully surround him. The young man quickly made his way into the thicket, and the leader of the gang gave a clear signal to his people to attack exactly at his command. Iwu smiled with potential trouble. Finally, everything was properly assembled. This would be fun. He gently sank down to the ground and tapped the grass with his polished shoes. He said out loud that it was high time for the bandits to leave. He was being closely pursued by some group and was glad to find those who would help stop them. The enemy group grew visibly tense. Perhaps the young man has reinforcements? It could be quite dangerous. He probably brought an entire army along with him. But after a moment, the bandits decided that it did not matter. It was absolutely necessary to kill them all, and right there, it would be clearly visible. Iwu, with a slight smile, carefully observed what was happening. His clever plan was a total success. Now the enemies will completely destroy one another. Next, there was the loud rumble of battle, and a huge cloud of dust rose high into the sky. The gang leader, in a complete daze, stared at the battle and did not notice how Alon, waving a weapon, dashed straight in his direction. At the very last moment, the man managed to react and block the heavy blow. The bandits were completely furious. A group armed with sharp knives fiercely attacked people wearing costumes. Meanwhile, Iwu carelessly ate an apple, closely observing what was happening with great excitement. Two enemy groups had stepped out in serious combat. The guy smiled. They can fight even to the death. It is actually quite fun. Some time passed. The leader in a suit breathed heavily. This intense fight took way too much effort out of him. Alon pointed out that the enemy was certainly strong enough, but he was not going to admit defeat. Iwo approached the enemies and asked with a smirk when they would finally finish the fight, or perhaps if they might need some help. The opponents froze completely, unable to believe that he actually dared to come back. Alon suggested that his opponent is actively defending Iwo, but he only growled back, without even having any such thoughts. The guy tightly grit his teeth in pure rage, fully realizing that they were simply wrapped around a finger and forced to destroy each other. He laughed out loud, finding their utter stupidity quite amusing. He pointed out that there is physical power but absolutely no mind, since they were so incredibly easy to outsmart. The leader of the gang finally thoroughly understood the enemy's idea and realized that they were simply burning each other out just to get rid of them. Uo with a smile noted that apparently not everything is so bad with his skills, since they finally realized it. Becoming deeply enraged, the man rushed straight forward, fully intending to completely destroy this insolent guy. Uo did not move at all, creating the distinct impression that it was impossible to avoid the blow. However, at the very last moment, he easily dodged it, realizing that with the mediocre skills his enemy possessed, he really shouldn't be so self-taught. After a brief moment, the guy threw the bandit completely aside with a lightning-fast movement of his leg. Alon watched this in absolute daze, deeply feeling the hidden power in every single movement of Ibu. The leader, with steadily increasing difficulty, fully realized that he had completely underestimated the enemy. He could not even assume that an ordinary person could kill so many people, and probably this young man truly possessed incredible skills. Wu, with a slight smile, noted that it was far too boring to fight against just one at a time, and so he invited the enemies to attack all at the exact same time. Alon firmly squeezed his weapons with strength, fully preparing himself for a sudden attack and a truly ruthless battle. The warrior was completely sure that he would deal with him alone and properly punish this young upstart who behaves far too impudently. He carefully observed his movements with a slight mockery, pointing out that this blow seemed more likely to be a fluke than something actually dangerous. However, at the very next moment, Alon suddenly attacked quite brutally. The guy with a predator's smile was eagerly expecting victory, entirely sure that now he would definitely destroy Yiwu with a single massive blow. However, quite unexpectedly, the enemy's voice was heard very close by, calmly pointing out the total futility of such standard attacks without real value. At the very next moment, Alon noticed that the hand was extending straight in his direction. The enemy had the sole intention of making just a slow slap, but from that single hit, the brain seemed to completely shudder, and pretty soon the guy fell heavily to the ground. The leader of the gang simply could not believe that this was generally possible. Ayu calmly declared that now it was the turn of the second one, but the man was not going to wait around for his fate. Backing away from the ground, he tried to hide himself as quickly as possible. The leader of the gang, desperately trying to save his face, threw it over his shoulder, which gives him a good opportunity to leave and not continue with the chase. With these final words, the enemy instantly rose to the sky, his legs easily pushing off the ground. The man fully understood that the chances of facing this highly powerful opponent are extremely small, but back at the academy, there were completely different plans. Picking up a sharp sword in his hands, he pierced the enemy's body with a lightning-fast movement. A cold look. The guy stared directly at the slain enemy, somberly pointing out that it would be much better to train in the next life. A brief moment later, the guy turned around and just walked away, leaving behind a field thickly scattered with defeated enemies. Soon enough, the young hero arrived at Ixo University, the specific arrival place for the team of Project In. The older sister of Thieu was eagerly waiting for a new participant. It had been a very long time since anyone had joined their team for the last time. Pretty soon, the door opened wide and several participants entered the room. Hyun Xiaoru warmly waved her hand, happily welcoming her older sister. Thieu, with a slight smile, said that today they expect the arrival of a new participant, and she dedicated herself completely to the whole team to present him to everyone. However, for some completely unknown reason, this person was late, and there was nothing left but to wait a bit. After some time, the door opened once again, and the guy appeared right on the threshold, immediately asking if there was a project team. Yan Xiaoru looked at the astonished faces. It was Fuin. The girl was in a slight state of bewilderment. Thieu gladly confirmed that it was right here where the project team was located, delighted that the new member had finally arrived. The girl approached Yiwu, and he introduced himself, politely greeting the new older sister. The young girl noticed that the guy was not only talented, but also very attractive. His presence on the team, without a doubt, would be a pleasant addition. Meanwhile, one of the participants drew attention to the goddess's expression, noticing that her interested look was directed at the newcomer. This fact caused him an obvious irritation. After having decided that it is necessary to teach a newcomer a lesson and immediately put him in his place, the young man began to think about the plan. Meanwhile, Ku said that Professor Bam went to an important meeting and will not be able to attend today. A guy named Segui mentally imagined how he would destroy an insufficient newcomer, and taking advantage of his magical abilities, he began to realize the plan. A laughter almost broke his lips. The next view promised to be truly grand. Yiwu felt a strange presence in his pocket, as if a strange object had appeared right there. But before he could manage to uncover the situation, the participant from the Sayuai loudly shouted out, accusing him of theft and demanding that the thief immediately stop. At the very next moment, a guard and a policeman accompanying him appeared in the building. The prosecutor nervously pointed at Yiwu, firmly insisting that it was he who stole a highly valuable artifact. However, the young man quickly assumed that it was thrown there by the subject with the hope of framing him. Maintaining his gravity, he asked if the accusation corresponds to reality. He calmly replied that he had not taken anything at all, but Segui continued to insist, claiming that he saw everything with his own eyes, and that the stolen pearl of Suiko was in the right pocket of the newcomer. Remaining perfectly calm, he allowed the guard to carry out a search if he doubted his words. The man appeared and carefully examined the content of his pockets, but after a brief moment, he raised his head and said that the suspect had absolutely nothing. The prosecutor froze in total shock, as if it seemed impossible, because he personally saw how the pearl was in his pocket. The young man calmly called the guard's attention to the fact that the real thief is standing right in front of him. The prosecutor, trying hard to hide his own crime, simply calumniated another. A tense and sinister silence reigned in the room. The guy insisted on his innocence, claiming that, as a main member of the team, he could not steal anything. He proposed to verify his words. The shameless scoundrel, without hesitating, agreed to a search without experiencing any worry. The guard stepped closer, demanding that he put his hands up and allow him to check his pockets. Segui obediently complied with this request because he was completely sure that the law agents would find nothing suspicious. The situation took a highly unexpected turn. Although the thief was sure that he threw the pearl into his pocket, it was not there. But at the very next moment, an even stranger event occurred. The guard noticed something in the pocket of the prosecutor himself, and reaching out, he pulled out a small bluish pearl. The young man froze in absolute rage, completely unable to understand how this happened and how the artifact turned out to be with him. But it was impossible to deny the obvious. Thieu was furious because he tried to frame someone else, while he himself turned out to be a thief. The guy grit his teeth with anger. He had definitely thrown Avian's pearl away, but for some reason it was found on himself. With a reflective look, he appreciated the enemy, wondering how, with such a level of intelligence, he dared to speak out against him. In fact, he had immediately noticed the pearl of the other person and felt the presence of magical energy. Not bewildered, he ingeniously mocked the enemy, silently throwing the artifact into Segui's pocket. Therefore, the villain received the punishment he deserved and was fully exposed for his meanness. Thieu, who was still boiling with indignation, said that even if the guy did not steal, trying to frame others is a grave violation for which he will be fired. Segui begged to be given a second chance, but the guards already grabbed him and led him away. Yiwu, with a cold calm, pointed out that everyone always reaps what they sow. With sincere regrets, Ku apologized to the guy for what happened on his very first day. He reacted calmly, noting that the main thing, however, was that it finally came to light. To make peace for the situation, Ku proposed to organize a joint dinner with colleagues. The young men arrived at the university cafe with eyes happily twinkling. He, with great pleasure, took several sips of a cold drink that penetrates the entire body with refreshing relief. The general mood improved quite notably, and so the tense atmosphere finally had to take a rest. Tu asked with genuine interest why, among so many options, he chose a barbecue specifically. He only replied rather mysteriously that it had things to do with some old acquaintances. As soon as he agreed to this, Wu Ting stepped closer to the table, saying that the delicious dishes were already fully prepared. She then turned toward the girl with a direct proposal to inspect the house that her parents had rented out. Although the girl was still a little bit disconcerted, a bright and joyful smile shone perfectly on the face of Wu Ting. Meanwhile, the lively conversation at the table went on, and someone suddenly noticed that something was clearly going on between him and Wu Ting. Hian Xiaoru observed everything with a slight displeasure, as if she strongly suspected that these two were hiding something special from the rest. Soon enough, she said that she really had to leave, but she warmly invited the others to continue enjoying the meal. Taking Wu Ting firmly by the hand, he confidently declared that they were going over to her place. The girl seemed to be a little bit surprised by this, but she did not argue at all and just followed him. Back at the table, the young guys delighted their eyes with pure joy, pointing out that there was definitely something going on between those two. Hian Xiaoru, on the very contrary, looked quite frustrated about it. The girl sighed deeply, but she did not say a single word, despite the rather insulting remark. Wu Ting then brought her close friend straight to her house and showed him all around the place. The young man remarked that the location looks incredibly good, and he was especially impressed by the beautiful view. The girl noted that the rental cost here is actually quite low, only about 500 yuan per month. He then handed her a card, mentioning that it had 1,000 yuan on it. He simply gave her this money so that she could easily pay the rest of the agreement. He also added that he plans to rent this house for a very long time, so this specific amount is completely insignificant to him. Wu Ting agreed to settle all the minor details later on. In the end, she kindly advised him to go to bed early, and wishing him a very good night, she left. The young man said goodbye. Left entirely alone, he instantly felt that the spiritual energy in this place was exceptionally strong, as if it were piercing through the space itself. He concentrated deeply, and a glowing ball of magical energy appeared right in his palms, which was incredibly powerful. However, quite suddenly, external circumstances made him snap out of it and think carefully. The young man clearly sensed a strange cluster of energy nearby and directed his sharp gaze right in that direction. Without wasting any time, he skillfully jumped out of the window and went immediately in search of the source. A completely unexpected sight was waiting for him out on the street. The Lion King, with a truly formidable growl, was moving toward a strange clot of pure energy. As he drew closer, he saw a massive wolf, whose terrifying presence left absolutely no doubt that this was a spiritual animal. At the very next moment, the wild beast rushed toward the lion with pure anger. The young man only smiled. Now it was perfectly clear to him what was actually happening. Swinging his fist, he felt a very dense spiritual energy completely filling the air. A brief moment later, the guy delivered a truly crushing blow, and massive cracks spread instantly from the impact site, tearing up the asphalt. His eyes flashed with a bright scarlet fire, closely watching every single movement of the enemy. The wolf was closing in rapidly, and the guy, frozen for just a tiny split second, quickly rushed forward, completely ready to meet the enemy face to face, without blinking and without giving himself a single second to hesitate. The guy, completely overcoming his fear, looked straight into the wide-open mouth of the wild beast, where the sharp fangs gleamed, ready to snap at any given moment. And then, after gathering all his strength into one swift movement, he made a lightning strike with his foot, so incredibly powerful that the ground beneath them shook violently as if hit by a sudden clap of thunder. As their fierce battle went on, dense clouds of dust and acrid smoke gradually covered everything around, completely turning the battlefield into a chaotic mist, where the silhouettes were barely visible. The guy, after he finally prevailed, stood there in a confident and victorious pose, holding his head high and looking down at the defeated enemy with a cold and contemptuous expression. Soon the wolf collapsed heavily onto the ground, right where the broken bricks and wooden debris lay scattered. It opened its eyes, trying hard to let out a powerful roar, but it was completely in vain. With one last desperate effort, the beast, however, roared, but it was already far too late. At this exact moment, Iwu dealt a massive blow with his fist. Magical waves dispersed instantly from the impact site, creating highly destructive vibrations. Soon the animal's body completely vanished, leaving behind nothing but a small glowing ball. The young man watched this phenomenon with great interest, feeling that the rich spiritual energy was completely filling every single one of his cells. He deeply inhaled this incredible power, and with every passing moment, his own strength was growing. In the next instant, he felt just like a celestial angel flying high above the ground and gently waving snow-white wings. The Lion King growled with pure joy, and the young man began to descend smoothly, returning entirely to his usual appearance. The guy noticed that the beast was not particularly happy that he wasn't the one getting the prey. A moment later, the dog emerged from the ground and quickly ran straight ahead. The Lion King rushed over to the remnants of the spiritual energy which were scattered among the debris. He watched its actions in complete perplexity, not understanding at all what exactly the beast was trying to do. But suddenly, it hit him. His eyes flickered with tension. Right in front of him was a spiritual vein that exuded a truly brilliant glow. The young man did not even expect to stumble upon it. Now it was perfectly clear why there were so many spiritual animals and such dense energy. It was a true place of power, a treasure ideal for cultivation. Now he could finally begin to practice the 1,000-mile technique. Iwu opened up a magical book whose pages immediately began to turn on their own. He concentrated a powerful current of power all around him to activate the skill. A few minutes passed before the young man opened his eyes. At that exact moment, his vision became incredibly sharp. The spiritual energy was so rich that the technique worked absolutely perfectly. But something felt wrong. The young man suddenly realized that he could see right through the walls, and he accidentally discovered that Wu Tin was taking a bath at that very moment. The girl was just about to immerse herself in the warm water and did not even suspect that someone was watching her. Iwu barely controlled his emotions and mentally begged for forgiveness for this completely involuntary sin. The very next morning, a loud noise was heard near the house. An ambulance drove right up to the building. The young man went out into the street and looked around in complete surprise, not understanding what could have happened so early. From around the corner, he noticed Wu Tin, who was frantically trying to help her mother stand up. The nurse firmly stated that the car was completely full, and if the girl needed to go, she would have to call a taxi. With these words, the car door slammed shut right in front of the bewildered girl. She stood there completely stunned, watching the car drive away, unable to believe that all of this was actually happening in reality. Awu approached her quickly and asked what happened. The girl replied that her mother had suddenly fallen very ill and that they had taken her to the hospital. The young man, without a single doubt, suggested following them as fast as possible. Meanwhile, the doctors gathered in the intensive care unit all around the patient. The chief doctor, with a clear heaviness in his voice, said that all efforts are completely useless and she cannot be saved. Her illness was accompanied by an internal cold and an external heat. He had never seen anything like it before, and even if a divine healer were to appear, he wouldn't be able to help her. The doctors decided to inform the family that the patient should be taken home. Wu Tin could not hold back her tears. It seemed completely impossible to her that this was happening in reality. She approached her mother, asking over and over again how she felt. The girl begged the doctor to save her because her mother was the only family she had left. But the doctor only shook his head, saying that the disease was far too rare, and there was absolutely nothing they could do. Ewu carefully repeated the main symptoms to himself: internal cold, external heat, a severe lack of yang energy inside the lungs, and a massive excess of yin energy right in the dantian. It truly was a remarkably rare condition, but perhaps he still had a way to handle it. The chief doctor, with a clear look of contempt, remarked that the young man probably doubts his medical skills, but Iwu only noted the facts with a very calm demeanor. The other doctors then mockingly asked how on earth a young guy like him could know such specific things, to which he simply replied that he had a dream about it. This caused a great amount of indignation among all the medical workers present, and the chief doctor then stated that the young man was clearly not happy here. However, he strongly insisted that human life is always about balance and that he could certainly try to help out. One of the doctors, who deeply desired to prove the complete futility of the company, decided to give the guy a chance and strictly explained that the treatment is only possible with the explicit consent of the family, and if it doesn't help at all, the young man will have to assume full responsibility. The doctors all looked at each other with a sly smile, unable to believe that this guy's self-confidence could actually achieve anything. He then turned toward the highly alarmed Wu Tin, asking her to trust him completely. The girl, looking down hesitantly, finally agreed. Right now, her mother's condition is extremely critical, and she simply had no other way out except to resort to at least something. Having successfully received her approval, the young man set to work with total confidence, knowing exactly what was going on. He ordered the doctors to closely observe and study. Later on, they would even thank him for providing such an invaluable experience. Several thin and translucent needles were carefully extracted from a special medical machine. They must be accurately introduced into the acupuncture points and then guide the spiritual energy, effectively connecting to the meridians and perfectly aligning yin and yang. After a brief moment, the woman slowly opened her eyes and a faint glow suddenly appeared in her gaze. At the very next moment, her body trembled violently, and streams of blood suddenly escaped from her mouth. He took her hand immediately, while a deep silence hung in the hallway, and everyone completely froze in panic. One of the doctors loudly declared that the guy had gone far too far and literally killed the patient. But the young man remained entirely calm, reassuring him that he hadn't killed anyone at all. The doctor insisted that there was no point in denying the obvious truth and pointed directly at the woman's motionless body. For a few moments, she truly remained completely without motion, closing her eyes tightly. But then, after several tense moments, the woman suddenly took a deep breath. Her chest heaved, and as if waking up from a very long dream, she slowly opened her eyes, looking all around her in complete surprise. Upon seeing that her mother had finally woken up, Wu Ting could no longer hold back her tears of relief. The intense emotions completely overwhelmed her, and she, covering her mouth with her hands, almost burst into tears of joy. Wu, with a warm smile, said that the treatment was successfully completed, and very soon the woman would recover completely. This will literally happen within half an hour. Still not fully understanding what had happened, she asked the question of who exactly was standing right in front of her. The young man, with a slight smile, responded that he was just an ordinary student. The doctor appeared utterly perplexed and, with a bit of doubt, admitted that they really should apologize, since they didn't realize the high level of skill that this guy possessed. Yiwu calmly said that an apology is not needed, but next time it's well worth being more attentive and not showing such a frank distrust. Having fully recovered from the commotion, she asked who this young man was because she was seeing him for the very first time. Wu Tin explained that right in front of her was her classmate named Yiwu, who managed to save her mother after performing a true miracle. Madame Zhu noted that she was infinitely grateful for his help. Still thoroughly impressed by what happened, she admitted that the boy had done her a great service, and now she doesn't even know how to properly thank him. The young man only smiled mysteriously and noted that they would discuss the answer to this question back home. Wu Tin looked at him in surprise, clearly not understanding what he was talking about. The guy, noticing her confusion, only laughed cheerfully and added that he knew the best way of gratitude. Time passed by, and the young man was already sitting at the kitchen table, eagerly absorbing the meat, since he was very hungry after the healing process. Wu Tin observed with a gentle smile how he pushed the food down, and meanwhile a mountain of empty plates grew rapidly all around him. The guy leaned back in his chair and, with a complacent look, said that he was now feeling an incredible surge of strength and energy. The girl shook her head with mild bewilderment, realizing that the exact payment he mentioned was only for her to prepare lunch for him. The young man, noticing her reaction, cheerfully got up from the table and, with sincere gratitude, declared that this dinner was absolutely magnificent. Ignoring Wu Tin's slightly frustrated appearance, he directed himself outward, saying that he was going to relax a little bit. The girl waved her hand with a slight displeasure, wishing him a good night. Her eyes suddenly gleamed, and a slight smile appeared on her lips. What an incredible person he is, and how good it would be if she once had the opportunity to marry him. Meanwhile, Ewu focused entirely on the concentration of magical energy inside his body and noted that the cultivation process in this place is truly more effective. Realizing this, the young man decided to accelerate his training and reach a brand new level as soon as possible. But quite suddenly, his concentration was violated by the furious and powerful barking of the dog, which sounded nearby. Ewu was surprised as he turned to the Lion King, asking him what he was doing here and why he came to this place. However, after a brief moment, the young man understood the true reason for the dog's appearance. Someone is cruelly plotting against Aunt Zhou. The guy was absolutely furious that anyone would dare to organize a conspiracy against his master's wife. This person would pay dearly for their actions. Without wasting a single second, he quickly rushed forward, cut through the air, and hurried straight to the estate. At the exact same time, in the area where the villa was located, there were major cardinal changes. Master Jian had already warned the family before a potential explosion, thanks to which everyone successfully managed to abandon the territory, and it was possible to completely avoid any casualties. However, the Yinfeng formation established in this place was accidentally destroyed by a fire. Years of hard work went straight into the dust, and now, to extend the life of the old Master Jian, it will be absolutely necessary to use extraordinary methods. A woman, realizing the extreme gravity of the situation, was fully ready to pay any price. But the man, looking at her with a bloodthirsty smile, said that he needed a drop of blood from her heart, a very special essence that can be extracted with a specific technique without resorting to any surgical intervention. She did not hesitate for a single second and firmly responded that she agreed, for if it saved her father, she was ready to make a sacrifice. The man nodded and said that in this case, they needed to enter immediately to carry out the ritual of removing the blood from the heart. The master's henchmen looked at each other, smiling. This woman turned out to be a naive, ridiculous fool. The master only needed a couple of cleverly selected words to deceive her, and now the lady genuinely believes that she can survive after the beating of her heartbeat is taken from her. One of the young guys declared that he had already fully mastered the Yin-Feng formation, and that he could easily stop it in the blink of an eye. With these words, he threw forward a small sheet written with mystical signs. The sheet rushed toward the door, completely surrounded by a sinister energy. Suddenly, there was a massive, powerful explosion that shook everything. However, a strange disaster emerged in the sky. Majestically flying on the sword of the Wu, he suddenly appeared over the battlefield. The young master looked up, completely unable to understand what was happening and who was trying to harm him. Ewu breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that he had finally arrived exactly where he needed to be. A massive, powerful dog flew right by his side, an incredible sight, deeply plunging those present into total shock. The students below looked at the sky with suspicion, unable to believe their eyes. The dog flying on the sword was far beyond their understanding. Ewu noted that someone restored the Yin-Feng formation. It is not surprising that the Lion King is so excited. The students realized that they were facing a yokai, and this presaged a fierce battle. They decided that they could not allow him to destroy the Yin-Feng formation, so they launched a powerful spear weapon. The attacks rushed toward Ewu, who calmly stood next to his faithful dog. However, the young man reflected them easily and used his powerful sword. Realizing that the forces were unequal, the students rushed to leave the path, realizing that they could suffer. The ancient masters tried to remain standing, but a powerful gust of wind knocked them down. The energy was so strong that it did not allow accepting the vertical position of the body. Lowering Laowei, with a cold expression on his face, said that now he realized who was standing behind the restoration of the Yin-Feng formation. They really have no fear of interrupting their own life cycle. The guys breathed heavily. They were deceived. This young man was not a monster. although they would have preferred a ghost in front of them. The fear encoded them with such force. They decided that this alien prevents them from completing the installation of the formation, but in fact, it is just a miserable garbage that did not maintain his attention. He thought that his cultivation appeared superficial. These types did not seem capable of creating such a complex formation. Maybe there is someone else here. Meanwhile, one of the boys grabbed the sword, charged it with a powerful force, and prepared for the attack. He turned toward his companion and offered to activate the Tunjim Matrix to confront the enemy. With these words, the sorcerer called upon a demonic spell, a celestial killer heart that deprives the mind and suppresses the spirit. A moment later, he announced that the Matrix was activated. Now they have become even more powerful. A majestic icon appeared on the ground, emitting powerful categories of electrical energy. The sorcerer was encoded with an evil force, and suddenly a demonic incarnation appeared by his side. He was not an ordinary cultivator. The guy clearly used the skills of ancient times. Ewu smiled thoughtfully. There were still people associated with the demon family. His opponent became furious like a fool and rushed forward with incredible speed. He appeared angry. His body exuded the powerful evil energy, improving his combat skills. But Ewu did not seem scared. He only breathed deeply. The young man released the chilly breath, settling it on the enemy. The enemy student shouted with horror. His body received a shot from the cold, depriving the opportunity to move. With a sneer, he said that with such skills it is not necessary to resort to evil forces. However, if someone chooses this path and loses their mind, they deserve punishment. With these words, the young man grabbed the enemy by the neck and began to strangle. He calmly affirmed that only then could he do the right thing and tightened his grip even harder. After a moment, he lifted and threw the exhausted enemy like unnecessary garbage. The student collapsed. His older brother froze, not knowing what to do. Realizing that in front of them was an opponent of unprecedented strength, the guy warned his comrades that this person can destroy them. The younger student ordered his minister to flee and collapsed without strength on the ground. The remaining student stepped back, realizing that he really should follow this advice. He decided to go to the master to take revenge for the deceased friend. However, unexpectedly, Ewu, who was a moment ago, suddenly appeared right in front of him. The young man calmly declared that he wanted to meet his mentor. The older student tried to take advantage of the steps of the shadow, but all his attempts to hide were unsuccessful. He grabbed him by the neck and asked who his master obviously was. Was it he who ordered to establish the Yin Feng formation? The frightened guy began to beg for mercy and promised to say everything if he was released. He admitted that his master is at the farm and that he was the one who ordered to establish the formation. Previously, this person was a great master of Mount Longchu, but he was expelled for violation of the rules. Overwhelmed by a demonic heart and exhausted nerves, he could no longer stay there and founded his own sect, collecting followers. Many years ago, he learned that the farm was in the hands of clouds and mist, and an ancient treasure was hidden above it, but its appearance required at least 1,000 years. To accelerate the process, the master destroyed the protective barrier and convinced the old master Jian to buy this farm. Then the magician secretly created the Yin Feng formation to absorb the energy of Han that lives there and bring it appearance of treasures. After hearing the story, he carefully scratched his chin. Now everything became clear. The frightened student collapsed on his knees, begging the great immortal to forgive him for the told truth. He only grunted and once again clarified what he was achieving. The next second, the powerful energy burst in the hands of the young men. He calmly said that the cultivator who uses such methods does not deserve mercy. A powerful explosion sounded, after which the student remained unconscious. Since the master's wife was in danger, he understood that he had to find her as soon as possible. He was about to go out to the road when a thought dawned on him, and the guy stopped. If he appears in his true appearance, then he will give away his cultivation. He must hide his strength. Meanwhile, the young woman sat in a large hall, in an armchair, and calmly said that she was ready. You could start taking blood from the heart. The sorcerer approached her with a huge knife, coldly saying that her blood would take her now. The woman felt anxiety. She reminded him of the promise not to cut her. The bastard still decided to deceive? The sorcerer abruptly raised his weapon and with a sneer asked if the lady really understood this only now. But too late. The woman mentally called for rescue, and the knife in the hand of the villain approached inexorably. She was horrified, not knowing how to avoid this terrible destiny. When it appeared that there was no salvation, suddenly he appeared, stopped the hand of the bastard in one movement. The sorcerer looked in front of him and saw a young man whose powerful fist was directed at him. At the next moment, the guy hit the enemy with force, and he flew to the wall with a roar. Iwu coldly said that it was painful for innocent women in plain daylight, the upper part of the shamelessness. To pass unnoticed, he used a disguise that looked like an image from a famous television program, with the intention of hiding his true personality even from his own lover. The sorcerer, meanwhile, stood up and said that the idiot with a weak cultivation could not block his path. With these words, the man released the yellow seal that rushed forward. On the way, the seal transformed into a huge and malignant spirit, which revealed its powerful mouth and rushed to the attack. The lover was very scared, but said with anger that the cultivator who betrayed his path and went against the will of heaven could not remain unpunished. With these words, the young man accelerated and hit his enemy with a blow. With a flick of his hand, he completely destroyed the enemy, leaving nothing behind but a few fading puffs of smoke. The sorcerer became absolutely furious, wondering how on earth the evil spirit he had spent 10 long years raising could be instantly wiped out by this random guy. Meanwhile, he was already tightening his fist, mockingly asking what the old man was waiting for, and if he really had no intention of joining the fight at all. However, the wizard was definitely not someone who could be easily intimidated, so he quickly crossed his hands, creating a protective circle around himself that immediately turned into a powerful shield. Iwu accelerated and struck hard, but he only crashed right against the barrier. The guy didn't lose his cool though, casually claiming these were nothing but cheap tricks. In the meantime, the magician summoned an evil spirit and strictly ordered it to attack, exclaiming it was his ultimate trump card and that it would be interesting to see how the enemy copes with it. The very next moment, several spiritual entities with their mouths wide open rapidly rushed straight toward Iwu. But the young man simply concentrated a powerful energy all around him as 1,000 gods and saints arose to defend his true spirit. In the next instant, he threw the blue chains forward, which immediately wrapped around the evil spirits. They gasped in absolute horror but simply couldn't escape the captivity, twisting around completely helpless. The sorcerer just couldn't believe what kind of power this was, now seriously wondering who he was actually dealing with. Iwu cast another chain and boldly declared that he was their real master. The sorcerer clenched his teeth in pure anger, wondering how this could be, since he truly believed this was just an inexperienced student. Now, the enemy understood it would be much safer to just run away rather than risking his life. He was completely furious, so the enemy didn't even think he could hide anywhere. The sorcerer ran through the deep forest, hoping to save his worthless life. But suddenly, the wizard felt the approach of something massive and truly evil right behind him. The very next second, the giant beast caught up to him and grabbed him tightly. The sorcerer screamed in absolute horror, but he just couldn't escape. A moment passed and he, completely exhausted, collapsed to the ground, while the beast looked down at him with pure disdain. Iwu caught up to them and ordered King Leo to avenge the offensive words the villain had spoken. The dog growled and prepared for the attack. The sorcerer watched in sheer fear, but he could no longer resist. Another moment passed and everything was finally over. He was gently patting the beast on its right side, and in response, it barked at him quite happily. Turning around, the young man saw that the master's wife was chasing a villain with reinforcements, so the guy decided to dissolve into thin air, leaving the wicked sorcerer lying there. Powerful warriors appeared, completely ready to grab this old troublemaker. The lady saw a defeated man lying on the ground showing absolutely no signs of life. Turning to her servants, the woman said the master had been killed by a mysterious person, and if they ever happened to be lucky enough to meet him, they should thank him properly. He watched all of this from his hiding place. The guy had spent all of his spiritual energy, so he suggested that King Leo go back and replenish his reserves. Soon, he sank to the ground and took a deep breath. Finally, the hero was back home. The young man decided to cultivate right here, and King Leo had to protect him while he completed the process, promising he would give his faithful companion a spiritual reward. But suddenly, a strong hand rested right on the guy's shoulder. The stranger said he shouldn't be here. Yiwu turned around and saw several arrogant men by his side, looking at him very suspiciously. The guy asked who they were and why they came here to establish their own rules. The stranger replied that they, Lord Wu's bodyguards, came here strictly for his safety. Right now, the master is training his fist technique, and nobody has any right to distract him. He asked in surprise, "Is this really called training the fist technology?" Because it felt more like a regular warm-up. The man grabbed the boy by his clothes, threatening that it was impossible to mock and insult the old man. But Wu himself unexpectedly interrupted their skirmish, ordering his subordinates to calm down and not touch the boy. The bodyguard froze, looking completely surprised at his master. The guy wanted to explain that this kid was saying offensive things about him, but Wu turned to Yiwu and asked what he had in mind. The young man replied that even in this technique there is some grace, but it lacks several key movements. It's like a dish without salt. It looks appetizing, but it's not very good. The master was highly surprised and said this technique was passed down from his ancestor and that it's impossible to slander it without proof. The young man should provide some evidence. Yiwu confidently replied that he would help bring this technique to perfection, and if the old man is satisfied, then he will leave this place and let him continue training. After thinking for a moment, Wu concluded that this guy is quite insolent, but if he actually fulfills his promise, then the master would not only give him this place, but would also start calling him his master. Yiwu clenched his fists and said that in that case, the training begins right now. The guy extended his hands and warned that he would show it only once. The very next moment, he rushed forward abruptly and struck the air with his fist with incredible force. A huge tree standing nearby instantly collapsed. The bodyguards, as well as Lord Wu himself, were totally stunned and stared at each other. The old man exclaimed that this was simply impossible with the exact same technique that usually sounds several times weaker. The guard noted that this guy was truly very strong, realizing they were lucky they hadn't started a fight, otherwise they would now be in the place of that tree. Yiwu decided that the demonstrated strength was quite enough, and Wu called him his master. The old man thanked him for the instruction and admitted he had acted unwisely, apologizing for his words and saying they could now leave this place. Wu smiled and said that, of course, he was a man of his word, and now this place belongs entirely to Yiwu. Bowing respectfully, the old man added that he was ready to fulfill any condition. The young man noted that he needed peace and solitude, so he didn't want any more people in this place. Wu turned to his bodyguards and ordered them to leave as soon as possible. He told his faithful dog that now nothing should interfere with them and that he can practice his cultivation. Wu ordered his subordinates to find out everything about the past of this mysterious master. He had concentrated his forces as too many events had occurred recently, and it seemed to him that all of this was connected to the past, despite the difference of 2,000 years. Aunt Zhou and his husband's wife were incredibly similar. Their development levels were almost identical, and the master himself also turned out to be a cultivator. All of this indicated that the world of improvement still exists. The guy couldn't believe this was just a mere coincidence. Some secrets were clearly hidden behind it. The young man decided he needed to learn more about this world, so he carefully looked at his phone and dialed a familiar number. Yiwu called his older sister Zhu and asked if there is a place in her university where he can find information about the events from 2,000 years ago. The girl replied that there is very little information of this kind at the university, but recently the research group went to the archaeological excavations of a tomb, and rumors say its owner is around 2,000 years old. If he is interested, then he can come tonight and see everything with his own eyes. He promised he would definitely take a look, deciding not to miss this opportunity. After putting the phone away, the young man noted that a tomb of this age is extremely curious and he should get to the bottom of the truth, as perhaps the clue lies right there. Soon night arrived, and the group hit the road. The soft clouds barely pulled away from the moon. Tiu explained that several bodyguards came along with them, whom the university sent for the sake of safety. The professor walking ahead of them proudly said it was very important for the research group to take the initiative, so that other universities couldn't get ahead of them. Tsiu noted that it's no wonder the director was rushing so much. The very next moment, the car stopped and the guys saw that the road was completely blocked by a large fallen tree. The professor suspected that things weren't quite so clean here. Suddenly, a sharp arrow flew out and pierced the chest of one of the men, who immediately collapsed to the ground, losing his life. The others froze in absolute horror, realizing they were in grave danger. The guard ordered the group to hide inside the car while he and his colleague prepared to defend themselves. Out of the darkness, evil ninjas armed with swords appeared and rushed to the attack. The first guard skillfully deflected the blows, but soon another enemy appeared behind him and slashed his back. The man fell, and his companion continued to fight desperately. Fully aware that the forces were completely unequal, the professor and the students watched the battle in pure horror from the car windows. One of the girls was crying in fear, and Tsiu tried to keep her cool, even though her heart was pounding fast. The second guard was also wounded and fell to the ground, leaving the researchers completely defenseless. The leader of the ninjas approached the car and, with a wicked smile, ordered everyone to get out. The professor, trembling with fear, opened the door and begged for mercy, saying they were just scientists. The villain punched him right in the face, knocking him to the ground, and declared that he didn't care who they were, they just needed the map of the tomb. Right at that moment, a mysterious figure appeared among the trees, moving with incredible speed. Before the ninjas could even react, the newcomer knocked down two of them with precise blows. The leader of the attackers turned around completely enraged and ordered his men to destroy the intruder. But the young man, whose face was completely hidden, gracefully dodged the attacks and counterattacked with overwhelming force. Within just a few seconds, all the ninjas were lying unconscious on the ground. The leader, seeing that he was all alone, tried to escape, but the mysterious savior instantly blocked his path, demanding that he say who exactly had sent him. The ancient tomb appeared to be incredibly strange, and the archaeological team that had previously approached it still hasn't returned yet. Following standard safety precautions, they ultimately decided to take the armed guards along with them. Both Qian Xiaoru and Lin Xianxian were trembling with intense fear as a terrible bad feeling lingered deep inside them. Tsiu strictly ordered everyone not to rush forward senselessly, stating that they would all fall together if anything went wrong, but surely nothing bad would actually happen. Some time passed by and the group went deeper into the massive cave, while Qian Xiaoru kept trembling, trailing tightly behind. The bodyguards looked around with great curiosity, noticing that the cave was absolutely enormous. Qian Xiaoru even noted that her own house was much smaller compared to this vast place. Xiu reminded them that their main primary task was to find the lost archaeological team and bring back a highly valuable artifact for the university to study. The young men walked even further into the dark when Yiwu suddenly felt a very strange energy. The guy quickly turned around, but he saw absolutely nothing, which left him feeling quite bewildered. Tiu noticed his visible anxiety and asked what was wrong, but the young man didn't want to scare the others ahead of time, so he lied, saying he just felt a little dizzy. The travelers had no idea that they were already being followed. Several masked people were closely watching the new archaeological group. They had already completely destroyed the previous team. One of them sinisterly said that nobody would leave this place alive tonight, while a sharp, deadly weapon gleamed in his hand, perfectly ready to strike at any given second. Dozens of lethal, deadly needles instantly shot out from this hidden device. Huh? He tensed up and immediately sensed the imminent danger approaching. The young man sharply warned the others to be careful and quickly stepped right in front of them, completely blocking the path of the attack. The hero effortlessly caught all the flying needles with just one hand. It turned out to be incredibly easy. In the very next moment, he held them safely in the palm of his hand, successfully avoiding the lethal blow. The enemy froze in pure confusion, unable to understand why the sudden attack failed to hit its target. It was just too strange and completely incomprehensible. The bodyguards quickly readied their weapons and warily looked around their surroundings with caution. Dark, mysterious silhouettes began to slowly emerge from the thick fog. They were probably dangerous enemies. The girls tensed up noticeably, and one of them frantically whispered something about ghosts, but the other rushed to calm her down, urging her not to give in to fear. The guards immediately loaded their weapons, warning that they would open fire if it became absolutely necessary. The masked people gradually stepped out from the dense cloud of dust, confidently saying they weren't afraid of the attacked. Loud gunshots rang out as the bodyguards aggressively attacked, giving the enemy no chance to maneuver. However, one of the enemies suddenly waved his hand and magical energy blasts instantly appeared in the air, rushing straight toward them. The loud explosions shook the entire space, and thick smoke completely eclipsed the battlefield as the projectiles flew through the air. There were painful screams of agony as the magical projectiles quickly overwhelmed the bodyguards. The panicked men covered their faces with their hands, but the devastating effect of the deadly weapons was simply too powerful. The girls trembled in pure horror upon realizing that they were now left completely defenseless. The enemies carefully and appreciatively stared at the beautiful young women who had just arrived. One of them mockingly suggested having some fun before completely getting rid of them. His companion fully supported the cruel idea, smilingly adding that they could easily share the prey. Suddenly, a calm and quiet voice from Iwu rang out, whom everyone seemed to have completely forgotten about until they suddenly remembered his presence. The enemies quickly turned around. His figure could barely be seen through the thick smoke, and yet the presence of this guy here was clearly unexpected. At the very last moment, the guy blocked it with a slight, casual movement of his hand, and the magical energy completely dissipated into the air without causing him any harm. The shocking explosion shook the area, and a biting, bitter smoke instantly filled the whole space. The enemy laughed nervously, realizing that he had been countered so effortlessly. The girls standing behind him started coughing from the bitter smell of the smoke, and their deep fear grew even stronger. The young women exhaustedly collapsed onto the ground, completely unconscious, as the effect of the smoke bomb was totally instantaneous. Iwu disdainfully pointed out that such flashy tricks were nothing but show. The bandit was absolutely furious, wondering how on earth this guy remained completely unharmed even after such a powerful attack. The guy didn't seem scared at all. On the contrary, every single one of his movements radiated an incredible, deep calm. Grabbing a sharp, gleaming blade, the enemy rushed forward with absolute confidence to win the fight. He fully intended to slit the throat of this bold young man and quickly end this discussion right then and there. However, remaining completely motionless, Iwu stopped the swift attack, effortlessly catching the sharp blade with just 2 fingers. After a brief moment, the weapon shattered into 2 pieces with a loud snap, and a sharp fragment sliced the attacker's shoulder, forcing him to cry out in intense pain. The bandit grew extremely weak and soon collapsed, losing total consciousness. His loyal henchmen who witnessed this shocking scene were utterly horrified, realizing they had clearly underestimated their enemy. Ewu coldly asked if the enemies were going to attack all at once or just one by one. The enemies were completely lost. One of the younger ones anxiously asked the old man what to do, and he, clenching his teeth tightly, replied that not all hope was lost just yet. He quickly pulled out an ancient artifact, a mystical soul-sealing lamp. Iwu was clearly alerted by this, thinking it could actually be quite useful for him. The enemy noticed the guy's reaction and smiled wickedly, implying that the young man had no other choice but to drop to his knees and beg for mercy. Despite the enemy's threatening words, he remained completely motionless, silently staring at him. The second bandit falsely assumed that the young man was frozen in fear and that dealing with him would be incredibly easy. The leader of the criminals gave a final warning, stating that if the youth bowed before him right now, his life might be spared. However, at that exact moment, his own self-confidence wavered as Iwu took a step forward. But in the very next moment, the unbelievable happened. The young man made a swift, sweeping motion with his foot and delivered a crushing, devastating blow. The enemy shuddered in pure pain and rage, clearly not expecting this at all, looking completely dazed. The villain, turning back to his companion, brutally declared that since the boy dared to strike him, he fully deserved to die. The bastard quickly activated the power of his lamp, but at that exact same moment, powerful glowing chains tightly locked around him, completely preventing the use of his energy. Elwu noted with great interest that a soul-sealing artifact was a very rare find, and now it belonged entirely to him. The guy focused his energy, and the chains finally completely subdued the magical object, which could now serve him well. The young man looked around and began to inspect the battle site, while the glowing chains silently slipped back close to him. In the next instant, he abruptly attacked the enemy, sending the chains shooting straight forward. The bastard instantly felt that this was the absolute end. He desperately tried to resist, but it was already far too late. At that very same moment, the magical shackles tightly bound him, and his spirit was forcefully separated from his physical body. In absolute desperation, the bandit begged his companion for help, but the other man, completely paralyzed by fear, hesitated and finally threw the lamp away. It fell heavily onto the ground, continuing to radiate a powerful glowing brilliance. The gang leader, visibly trembling, desperately begged for forgiveness from his minister, softly murmuring that he never truly wanted any of this. He sank down heavily right in front of the lamp, frantically trying to save his own position, but it was already far too late. He picked up a strange artifact and quietly noted with calm reassurance that, instead of showing any real repentance, he could simply follow his companion. The unfortunate, wretched bastard sank straight to the floor, instantly gripped with absolute horror. In the very next instant, his soul was also securely sealed within a powerful magic chain. Now, he firmly held a bright lamp in his hands, and his bitter enemies were securely captured inside of it. But that was not all, as highly suspicious sounds suddenly came from the deep darkness. The young man turned around quite abruptly, very carefully examining the surroundings, trying to fully understand what that could possibly be. He stepped closer to the TSU, gently took her carefully into his arms, and said in a low silence that everything was now completely in order. Then he gave the young lady a powerful restoration pill. Just as soon as the girl swallowed it, her condition began to improve quite noticeably. Soon enough, the older sister opened her eyes and looked all around her very anxiously. For a brief moment, the girl froze in utter bewilderment, trying to comprehend exactly what was happening. Qian Xiaoru and her close friend also began to slowly recover. They felt a very sharp headache. Lin Xianxian noticed something truly incredible, and her eyes opened extremely wide with sheer shock. Just right in front of the girls lay the motionless bodies of defeated enemies, completely still and terrifying. The young girl, with pure horror, hid tightly behind her wu and whispered in a trembling voice that those were the dead. Tseu and Tian Xiaoru both trembled, deeply shocked by the grim sight before them. Yiwu realized that he had completely forgotten to deal with the bodies of the enemies, and now he absolutely had to explain the situation. After a short pause, the guy explained quite calmly that after the tragic death of his bodyguards, he raised his weapon and boldly entered the battle, and then he was able to win. The girls noted with deep gratitude that he was truly strong and a genuine hero. He was quite embarrassed, and they noticed that they were all far too excited. A moment later, the guy mentioned that nearby he saw a strange wall that urgently needs to be examined. The young man walked up to her and very gently touched her palm. He did not know what was hidden behind this barrier, but the surface was surprisingly hot. At that exact same moment, something very strange happened. The bricks moved out to the sides with a loud resounding rumble. Wu frowned deeply, not understanding that all of this means that what was currently happening seemed extremely mysterious to him. TSU explained that they opened the door to the main tomb, and now she herself warmly invites them inside. The girl enthusiastically declared that this is a great opportunity to look inside and discover what was secretly hiding in there. He was walking right behind the rest, thinking about just how incredibly saturated the spiritual energy was here. If cultivators were to be found here, this could easily turn into a very interesting test for him. For several minutes, they moved very carefully along the dark and completely empty hall, looking all around them. All of a sudden, CEU was highly cautious, catching strange sounds and turning around sharply. Right in front of her appeared the head of a truly ghastly skeleton. The sight was honestly terrifying. After a brief moment, everyone saw that dozens of skeletons, long extinct in a circle, were sitting directly in front of them. TSEU, with a noticeable tremble in her voice, asked who these people are and why they were all dead. The situation seemed deeply sinister. She approached with great caution and noticed that a sword was lying right over the head of one of the skeletons. The young girl extended her hand, wanting to take a weapon to study it, but suddenly this Gu called out to her sharply, demanding that a friend must not touch the sword, as this could be extremely dangerous. Siyu was surprised, completely failing to understand why he reacted that way. However, at that very same moment, a powerful wave of energy pushed him right back. Awu barely managed to catch her, firmly warning that she should be careful. TSCU fell heavily to the floor, but thanks to the timely support of E, her fall was not quite as hard. The girl was breathing heavily, trying hard to recover. Meanwhile, powerful electric discharges suddenly appeared in the sky, instantly drawing the full attention of the local mages. Several strong guys wearing white clothes froze in place, staring at this phenomenon with obvious surprise. The young master Zhang Xian whispered that right ahead of them is a magical phenomenon of lightning. The spiritual energy within the tomb grew rapidly, which clearly testified to the appearance of a highly valuable treasure. The girl's minister anxiously announced that the connection with their people sent inside was completely lost. Zhang Xian frowned deeply, heard this grim news, and said not to panic with an obvious tone of irritation. The girl ordered her team to go straight to the tomb and the rest to guard the entrance and prevent absolutely anyone from leaving it. At this moment, inside the cave, Yiwu asked TSCU with genuine concern how she is feeling. The girl confidently assured him that she was fine. Tian Xiaorou and Lin Xianxian seemed even more frightened because their worst fears were fully confirmed. Ghosts really did exist, and this was truly terrifying. Suddenly, the skeletons lit up with a brilliant light and began to rise up. Their terrible appearance inspired real horror. Yiwu warned the girls to stay put and that they should not bow down. One of the skeletons arrogantly said that there was no place in these possessions for outsiders and ordered them to be cleared out before it was too late. The young man prepared himself for battle and asked who the master of these skeletons is, wanting to discover the true name of their leader. But the skeletons completely refused to answer, stating that their only task was to destroy the outsiders. The armed crowd rushed forward, shouting angry threats about the imminent death of the trespassers. Ewu only smiled. If he does not want to talk, it simply means that the conversation can be easily replaced by a fight. He launched a powerful magical ball that rushed forward to shatter the silence. Under its influence, the skeletons began to collapse, losing their weapons. The girls watched what was happening with total amazement, unable to believe their eyes, seeing if their companion really possesses such a powerful magic. One of the defeated skeletons, barely holding on, faintly asked who he was. Gripping the remaining part of the sword in his hand, he looked coldly at the enemy. Instead of a direct answer, the young man only noted that his name does not matter, as he was interested in something completely different. The guy waved his weapon, pointing out that the undead crossed the line and made him angry. A single blow was more than enough for several skeletons to crumble into dust. Then the young man threw the sword to the ground, noting that even after 1,000 years of intense suffering, their end had finally arrived, and now they will be able to be reborn, avoiding further torment. TSCU looked at him with absolute wonder. The girl thought about who this Gyu really is, because it is completely obvious that he is no ordinary person. The young man only smiled softly, saying that he was just a good person and that she should not be afraid at all. A sword began to fall directly from the ceiling, emitting powerful magical currents of lightning bolts. Wu was quite alarmed by this phenomenon. Right in front of him was a thundering sword that contained the crushing power of lightning. For several moments, Yiwu did not take his eyes off the sword, deeply feeling the power that emanates from it. Suddenly, the young man was on high alert, staring into the darkness intently. The girls also noticed a danger that was rapidly approaching and froze completely with fear. Along with the fighters, it was approaching fast. His gaze was entirely filled with absolute determination. Yi instinctively covered his companion with his hand, fully protecting them from any potential aggression. Zhang Xian smiled. Just as he had thought, the treasure was right here, and they had arrived just in time. Tiseiyu frowned deeply. Everything that was unfolding around her felt like a scene straight out of a martial arts combat movie. With a conceited smile, Zhang Xian confidently approached the investigators and then boldly declared that if this guy dared to lay his eyes on the thundering sword, he would be forced to give it away as a gift. With pure disdain, Uwu pointed out that right in front of him lay a brand new wave of the Thubab Shob, whom it would be quite easy to confront and deal with. One of Zhang Xian's loyal henchmen, a young fighter, remarked that this young man might possess some strength. However, he insisted this was not a problem at all, as they would quickly show everyone who the real master was around here. Several strong guys rushed forward all at once in a brutal attack. One from Gromil claimed that this was his rightful territory, and absolutely no one would dare challenge his right to it. He calmly observed the approaching enemies, and at the very last second, he executed a sharp maneuver, successfully evading the incoming attack. The attacker swung his sword wildly, but he could not even manage to graze the enemy. In response, Wu delivered a swift blow, from which the enemy reeled backward and then collapsed heavily to one side. The next precise kick finally sent him completely knockout. Zhang Xian watched the battle unfold with total horror. She simply could not comprehend who this young man was and why he was so incredibly strong. Realizing that brute force alone would not bring her victory, the girl decided to act differently. Wu wisely saw right through her, attempting to unravel the opponent's sinister plan. With a cunning smile, she approached the frightened ladies and smoothly declared that it was best for the young man to stop the battle immediately. Zhang Xian grabbed the captured girls and stated with an air of self-assurance that she could handle the situation now. The lady emphasized that she held no malice toward the boy for the death of her people, but she had absolutely no intention of giving up on her dream. This thundering sword belonged to her, and Wu had to surrender it unconditionally. Otherwise, his companions would die in an instant, very quickly. Hia Xiaoru looked at the young man with a silent prayer, begging him to save them from this terrible fate. He sighed deeply and reluctantly agreed. He invited the enemies to step forward and retrieve the thundering sword. Zhang Xian ordered her people to follow the captives closely, and she marched straight toward the weapon. The girl quickly rushed toward the magical artifact. The moment her fingers touched the blade, she felt a powerful current of energy. But in the next instant, magical chains suddenly manifested all around her, rushing directly toward her body. Zhang Xian's associates turned abruptly, instantly sensing the approaching threat. The young woman also felt the danger closing in and looked around herself in utter bewilderment. In the very next second, the strong fighters were utterly destroyed and their souls were swallowed by the magical chains. He asked the girls with concern how they were feeling, and they responded that everything was fine with them. Zhang Xiayun became utterly infuriated. Her plan had completely failed, and this young man was entirely to blame for everything. With pure rage, she declared that he had saved them in vain, as she dared to attack his people. Wu calmly replied that they were his enemies, and a guy must fight to win. Zhang Xian arrogantly acknowledged him as a worthy opponent, but she emphasized that she now held a thundering sword in her hands, which meant his end was near. The next second, the girl conjured a magical attack in the form of several blue fire-breathing dragons. They rushed toward Wu, emitting destructive magical vibrations. Zhang Xian commented smugly that her enemy was completely helpless against such power. However, the young man was not lost at all and began to move with the speed of lightning. A powerful shield surged from the ground, fully protecting the hero from the attack. The astonished opponent watched what was happening, unable to believe her own eyes. The guy retreated to a safe distance, making himself completely inaccessible to the attack. A powerful explosion blasted right next to Zhang Xian, making her cry out in pure horror. He noted that a thundering sword is a spiritual artifact and offered to teach her how to use it correctly. The girl hissed with hatred that the young man was severely underestimating her strength, and she signed his death warrant. The young man easily soared into the air, remaining absolutely calm. Zhang Xian's eyes widened in complete shock. It seemed to her that what was in front of her was nothing but an illusion. But after a moment, the girl realized she was trapped inside a magical cage. She asked with a sneer how such a situation was even possible. In that moment, he quickly pulled his arms from his hands, leaving Zhang Xian looking visibly surprised. Wu advised her to monitor her sword very carefully and not to allow any supervision. Then the young man soared even higher into the sky, and the girl cried out in utter amazement. The young man clearly demonstrated how to properly use a thundering sword while hanging suspended in midair. Zhang Xian instinctively covered her face with her hands, feeling that the intense electric discharges began to thicken all around her. She screamed out desperately, fully realizing that her defeat was inevitable. But in the very next second, everything came to an end, and he gently descended to the ground and looked all around himself. He carefully studied the weapon in his hands. Its outward appearance fully confirmed its magical origin. A mysterious icon was blinking upon the brilliant blade. Meanwhile, Zhang Xian, fully enveloped in electric discharges, screamed out in pure horror. The young woman rose up beneath the ceiling under the absolute influence of the electric discharges. Soon after, the girl fell heavily to the ground, and the rest explicitly declared that she was dead. However, he calmly reassured the young ladies that Zhang Xian was still alive, and he strongly urged them not to worry at all. TCU looked severely at the satellites, deeply wondering how the young man could possibly use such advanced magic. His entire personality became increasingly mysterious. Meanwhile, a thundering sword pierced deep into the ground. It was explained to her that this was not magical at all. Today, he had accidentally found an ancient text about 9 truenos, which meant this adventure was not entirely useless after all. At the exact same time, right at the edge of the cliff, the old wizard anxiously watched the celestial phenomenon that had appeared directly above the ancient tomb. Its appearance did not foresee anything unusual, yet deep doubts began to slide into the old man's soul. The man knew perfectly well that Zhang Xian had gone there, but she still did not respond to his continuous challenges. The upset master clearly foresaw the terrible misfortune that was supposed to affect absolutely everyone. Meanwhile, she opened her eyes, because she heard a distinct sound right by her side. The guy was sitting peacefully in a meditative pose, and Zhang Xian slowly began to come to her senses. Yi Wu abruptly broke away and rushed forward, stating with a highly satisfied smile that he had successfully achieved his plan. The girl desperately prayed for mercy, while the young man had already grabbed her tightly by the throat. She admitted that she belongs to the Wan Shanya sect and had arrived here by direct order of her mentor, in search of hidden treasures. She urgently needed a thundering sword. Wu quickly released her, thinking that, just as he expected, the traditional sects of the cultivators still exist. The guy concentrated a powerful energy within his hands with the explicit intention of keeping his sword for himself, and the girl ordered to leave. Zhang Xian abruptly grabbed his hand, begging him to stop. She was completely ready to follow him anywhere and obey any of his commands. Having completely failed in her task, she knew perfectly well that if she returned empty-handed, they would surely kill her. But under the safe protection of a person as powerful as Yi Wu, she might actually survive. The young man made it explicitly clear that he was not interested in this proposal. Pulling away, the guy left, completely leaving her without a single choice or the opportunity to justify herself. Lin Xianshan sighed with deep relief. They could finally leave this somber place. Meanwhile, he concentrated energy within his hands and placed a powerful spell upon the girls. Zhang Xian was highly cautious. He is her friend, so why does he do this? The young man fully understood her confusion, but he deliberately washed away a part of their conscious memories. His cultivation had been revealed, and if they were to learn about it, the final consequences could turn out to be catastrophic. The night passed quickly, and finally, a new day arrived. The bright rays of the sun illuminated the sky, and the 3 girls gradually came to their senses, waking up in the project team's office. Meanwhile, he studied the manuscripts found in the tomb. They were ancient, but not very valuable. Yu, after waking up first, looked around in surprise. Her consciousness cleared gradually, but understanding the situation was not easy. The young man turned around and greeted them, explaining that this was the project group's office. Scratching his head, he began to remember they were in the tomb, but he couldn't understand how they were here. He explained that this was a normal reaction. There was too much oxygen in the tomb, so everyone lost consciousness. Suddenly, his stomach rumbled treacherously, demanding urgent attention. The guy felt a sharp discomfort and decided to urgently find the bathroom. He headed for the exit, telling his friend to rest. Entering the corridor, he saw the workers involved in the repair. The signs on the doors were removed, but one of the employees suggested that the men's cabin was to the left. The young man entered hurriedly, sure he had reached the right place. To his astonishment, a girl was in the booth, looking extremely embarrassed. Her face was distorted with horror, and she screamed, accusing him of perversion, after which she pushed him with force. The guy fell with a roar, hitting his back against the wall. Jumping out of the booth, she was not going to leave it like that. The desire to teach a stranger a lesson was red in her eyes. She attacked the unfortunate Yue, barely giving him time to react. However, the young woman managed to teach the guy a lesson, throwing poisoned needles at him. The girl paralyzed him with her magic, depriving him of the ability to move for a day. She announced with a smile that today he had to spend the day in the bathroom so as not to do foolish things in the future. The girl noted that everyone was harvesting the fruits of their actions, so her actions were quite fair. He could not contain his bitter tears. Disappointment covered him from head to toe. He didn't understand why he was in such a situation, because the young man himself was the victim of a coincidence. At this moment, several girls approached the bathroom, discussing a new teacher at a medical school named Xiaowa. The young woman at the age of 20 has already become the general director, who spoke of her outstanding abilities. One of the girls approached the booth and tried to open the door, but something was alerted. He held the door with all his might, and outside, they were perplexed by what was happening. The young man was covered in anger. The woman he accidentally saw in the stall was ruthless and blocked all his meridians. Fortunately, the guy could use internal energy to restore his strength. Otherwise, he really would have to sit here all day. Having concentrated, the young man involved spiritual abilities at the next moment. Sharp needles left his body. Having gained freedom, the guy experienced relief, but he couldn't leave it like that. He was going to find that girl and pay her back. Meanwhile, Xiaowa arrived at the registration office. The secretary of the Persistent smiled affably, noting that she had heard a lot about the new employee. She handed the girl pre-prepared materials for familiarization. Xiaowa took the newspapers, smiled with gratitude, and was about to study them. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Several men in white shirts entered the room. The main guy, with a smile, declared that Xiaowa had finally been found. The secretary recalled with indignation that this is an office of the educational institution and entry is prohibited for strangers. However, the stranger, feeling like the master of the position, ignored his words. Taking the dagger out of his pocket, he threw a weapon at a woman. The lady froze in pain, unable to move. Her face was distorted. Xiaowa watched what was happening with horror. The girl turned pale, and her eyes widened in fear. The villain passed indifferently by the wounded woman and approached Xiaowa, who was trembling with horror. This man, Liu Gisen, the villain, reminded his girlfriend that at the last auction he acquired a rare plant with a divine aroma that he wanted to obtain. The girl said that she had already returned it to him, but Liu Gisen did not take her words seriously. He ordered his people to weave a lady to refresh her memory. Xiaowa tried to leave and demanded in a loud voice to let him go, but the kidnappers only advised not to waste energy in vain and to endure. A moment later, the door of the black car slammed shut. The leader gave the order to go further. He who became an accidental witness froze. It seemed to him that she was kidnapped by them, or it was the play of his imagination. The guy looked carefully after the departing car. He needed to discover the truth. An hour later, the alarming events unfolded in the dark building. Xiaowa sat down, tied hand and foot. Her torturer announced that she had the last opportunity. Liu Gisen threw the phone to the girl and ordered her to call to demand the plants. Otherwise, she should not blame him for cruelty. The young woman raised her head, looked at him loosely, and spat in his face with a challenge. Her gaze was full of courage and contempt. Liu Gisen exploded with anger. With ire, he demanded an explanation of what right she had to behave so boldly. Xiaowa, with burning indignation, replied that the plant belonged to her because she bought it herself, and no one has the right to take it away. At the next moment, the bastard raised his hand and struck the girl on her cheek with force. She reeled from pain and surprise. Then Liu Jisen approached her. His voice was full of cold gloating as he announced that he intended to collect the plant, and if he couldn't, he would play with her first and then kill her. Without hesitation, the villain ran forward and began to tear the clothes of the unfortunate girl. But unexpectedly, at that very moment, the door opened with a roar. The Yue, who quickly traced the path of the automobile, broke into the concrete building. Liu Gisen turned sharply. His face was distorted with surprise. But unexpectedly, at that very moment, the door opened with a roar. The Yue, who quickly traced the path of the automobile, broke into the concrete building. Liu Gisen turned sharply. His face was distorted with surprise. He couldn't even imagine that this was possible. He looked around. His lips trembled in a slight smile. In this place, it seemed very fun. The bandits paid attention to the uninvited guest and, with a challenge, asked him who he was, insinuating that he should not interfere with the young master to deal with his affairs. Jian Xiaowa looked at the young man and recognized him. In their first meeting, she paralyzed him with poison needles. How strange it is to see him here, alive and sound. Igu replied calmly that he could not stand people who make fun of women, and he only came to give the bastard the opportunity to apologize. Liu Gisen writhed with contempt and said with anger that this miserable guy was not worthy of becoming a hero, and he tightened his weapons in his hands even more. Jian Xiaowa screamed in panic, begging him to run. This cruel and ruthless person could kill him. Several strong men took positions behind him, waiting for their master's command. The young man looked coldly at Liu Gisen and declared that he had given him the opportunity to improve, but he simply didn't use it. The bastard smiled with deep contempt and gave his people the direct order to completely destroy an upstart, because nobody else dares to threaten a person as truly majestic as he is. Jian Xiaowa shouted with a broken voice, warning the hero to be very careful. The enemy bandit ran quickly forward and waved a knife with great force. The sharp edge of the blade passed just a few millimeters away from Awu, but the young man reacted instantly, grabbed the enemy's wrist and squeezed it with so much strength that he screamed in pain. The very next second, Iwu skillfully took the weapon from his hands, and now he himself had a clear advantage. With a light weight, the boy threw several bandits as if they were trash bags, while injuring them without leaving any chance of resistance. Liu Gisen was surprised, not believing his own eyes, and Jian Xiaowa also froze in a state of shock. Ewu, enjoying the triumph, looked boldly into the eyes of his enemy. The next second, the young man broke out with a powerful impulse and quickly ran forward, approaching the enemy. Liu Gisen, like the ultimate cowardly rat, hid Jian Xiaowa in a panic. A girl with a blank and glassy look observed exactly what was happening. Ewu said with contempt that in front of him is a miserable insignificance who uses a woman as a shield. But suddenly the guy felt the danger approaching from behind him and turned around abruptly. Another bandit rushed to the attack, violently delivering a powerful kick with his foot. The young man had no time to dodge, was thrown for several meters, tried to resist, but flew to a decent distance. Now there could be no doubt. The one attacked was an unusual person. He was an enlightened cultivator. Liu Gisen, realizing his obvious superiority, transformed instantly and greeted Zan Tian, who was supposed to teach Iwu a lesson. Jian Xiaowa with horror asked Ewu to flee because this guy was the strongest minister, Liu Gisen, and a martial artist. Zan Tian looked with a predatory gaze at the enemy and licked his knife, saying that he would never miss his target and that today the young man will die. However, he looked at his enemy with anger and said that he would really like to see how he was going to kill him. The angry cultivator rushed forward, waving a magical weapon. Iwu observed how much powerful purple energy violated around Zan Tian. The next moment, the young man accepted the challenge and waved his weapon. The guy noticed that his opponente had prepared well, but his tricks could not help him. With these words, Iwu inflicted a crushing blow. Jian Xiaowa saw this, stunned, holding her breath. The girl did not take her eyes off the hero. Liu Gisen was extremely furious. Zan Tian was surprised to notice that this guy is also involved in martial arts and is at a high level, asking with a mockery why his enemy, if he tried to kill, is still lying on the ground. Zan Tian rose with anger to climb to the label of another blow. Now the cultivator understood that he had made a mistake by underestimating the enemy. The next moment, Awu greeted a skillful movement while his opponent failed to turn around. There was a powerful blow, and for a moment, Zantian's clothes froze in the air. The bandit fell to the ground, a puddle of blood spreading beneath him as he bled from the wound. Zantian could not believe that this was possible, because he was very strong and incredibly significant in these places. Lugisen trembled with fear and could not believe that his minister, in whom he had such high hopes, died overnight. Awu turned to the young master and said that now his turn had come to die. The coward Liu Gisen fell to his knees in front of the boy and began to beg for mercy, began to slap himself on his cheeks and said that he deserves death because he had to look for the plant and kidnap Jian Xiaowa. Awu brought a knife over the criminal's head. This moment was incredibly tense. The guy's eyes gleamed with anger. The young man struck, but Liu Gisen closed his hand and was seriously injured. It was cold blood that the cut hand is the price of the kidnapping. And now the bandit should leave the path. Liu Gisen turned around and astonishingly wandered away and could not believe he was alive. And the hero watched him with contempt. Awu turned to a saved girl and said that now she is safe. The guy introduced himself. His name is Asheno, but the young beauty could call herself just a classmate. The girl was embarrassed, remembering their first meeting. But the young man said that everything was fine. He really went to the wrong bathroom, but don't worry. At first, the guy wanted to demand an explanation, but under the circumstances, it is better not to remember this. Suddenly, the door opened with a loud roar, and a huge truck crashed into the room. He was alerted and looked at the car that suddenly appeared for a few moments. Everything happened very quickly. The car ran into Awu, who had no time to bounce to the side. Jian Xiaowa saw this with horror. For a few moments, she froze in shock. A woman fell from the cab and hit the cement painfully, a rude voice coming from inside. A guy named Ling Kuni said that if someone does not receive treasures, they will certainly die today. Awu stood up, trying to recover after the commotion. The guy tried to distinguish who was so blind that he knocked him down. The unfortunate lady pointed to Awu and declared that this guy stole a treasure from the tomb. The young man clenched his teeth with anger. Once again, this insolent company stood in his way. Ling Kuni arrogantly asked how the young man did not die after such a blow and survived. Jian Xiaowa approached the guy and asked him how he feels. He was answered that he had broken his left hand and was in a slight numbness. Jian Xiaowa said that this can be fixed because she has several silver needles. She caught them in certain points. She can perform treatment. Awu replied that everything was in order. He has healing pills that will help him. The guy took out a magical pill and tried to swallow it. But suddenly Ling Kuni waved a knife at him. Realizing that his opponent was not paying attention to him at all, Ling Kuni was indignant. Not only was he not going to give a treasure, but he also intends to heal. However, the young man declared despicably that he was not going to give anything to anyone. This treasure belongs to him. Ling Kuni materialized many sharp knives around them, smiled with a predatory smile, and said that he himself would take the artifact. The next moment, Awu and Jian Xiaowa were alarmed by the approaching knives. The young man covered a classmate and ordered her to be careful. Awu pushed his girlfriend back, darkening her from an imminent danger. In the next instant, the knives pierced the stone wall and crashed into it with a loud roar. A powerful explosion was heard. He did not stop, covering the frightened Jian Xiaowa. Ling Kuni, with malice, noted that there are things that you cannot take and use for your own purposes. With desperation, he realized that, due to the injury, he could not use his strength at full power. Meanwhile, the enemy was already approaching rapidly, smiling more predatorily every second. Ling Kuni said that this is the last chance. If he does not give ancient texts and the sword, he will regret it very much. But the next moment, the events took an even more serious turn. Jian Xiaowa entered a fight, grabbing a strong stick. The girl waved with strength and shouted so that the villain immediately left. Several strong men took positions right behind him, waiting for their master's command. The young man looked coldly at Liu Gisen and declared that he had given him the opportunity to improve, but he simply didn't use it. The bastard smiled with deep contempt and gave his people the direct order to completely destroy an upstart, because nobody else dares to threaten a person as truly majestic as he is. Jian Xiaohua shouted with a broken voice, warning the hero to be very careful. The enemy bandit ran quickly forward and waved a knife with great force. The sharp edge of the blade passed just a few millimeters away from Yiwu, but the young man reacted instantly, grabbed the enemy's wrist, and squeezed it with so much strength that he screamed out in pain. The very next second, Yiwu skillfully took the weapon from his hands, and now he himself had a clear advantage. With a light weight, the boy threw several bandits as if they were trash bags, while injuring them without leaving any chance of resistance. Liu Gisenam was surprised, not believing his own eyes, and Jian Xiaohua also froze in a state of shock. Ewu, enjoying the triumph, looked boldly into the eyes of his enemy. The next second, the young man broke out with a powerful impulse and quickly ran forward, approaching the enemy. Liu Gisen, like the ultimate cowardly rat, hid behind Jian Xiaohua in a panic. A girl with a blank and glassy look observed exactly what was happening. Ewu said with contempt that in front of him is a miserable insignificance who uses a woman as a shield. But suddenly the guy felt the danger approaching from behind him and turned around abruptly. Another bandit rushed to the attack, violently delivering a powerful kick with his foot. The young man had no time to dodge, was thrown back for several meters, tried to resist, but flew to a decent distance. Now there could be no doubt. The one attacked was an unusual person. He was an enlightened cultivator. Liu Gisen, realizing his obvious superiority, transformed instantly and greeted Zan Tian, who was supposed to teach Yiwu a lesson. Jian Xiaohua, with horror, asked Yiwu to flee, because this guy was the strongest minister of Liu Gisen and a martial artist. Zan Tian looked with a predatory gaze at the enemy and licked his knife, saying that he would never miss his target and that today the young man will die. However, he looked at his enemy with anger and said that he would really like to see how he was going to kill him. The angry cultivator rushed forward, waving a magical weapon. Yiwu observed how much powerful purple energy violated around Zan Tian. The next moment, the young man accepted the challenge and waved his weapon. The guy noticed that his opponent had prepared well, but his tricks could not help him. With these words, Yiwu inflicted a crushing blow. Jian Xiaohua saw this, stunned, holding her breath. The girl did not take her eyes off the hero. Liu Gisen was extremely furious. Zan Tian was surprised to notice that this guy is also involved in martial arts and is at a high level, asking with a mockery why his enemy, if he tried to kill, is still lying on the ground. Zan Tian rose with anger to climb to the label of another blow. Now the cultivator understood that he had made a mistake by underestimating the enemy. The next moment, Wu greeted a skillful movement while his opponent failed to turn around. There was a powerful blow, and for a moment, Zan Tian's clothes froze in the air. The bandit fell to the ground, a puddle of blood spreading beneath him as he bled from the wound. Zan Tian could not believe that this was possible, because he was very strong and incredibly significant in these places. Liu Gisen trembled with fear and could not believe that his minister, in whom he had such high hopes, died overnight. Ewu turned to the young master and said that now his turn had come to die. The coward Liu Gisen fell to his knees in front of the boy and began to beg for mercy. He began to slap himself on his cheeks and said that he deserves death because he had to look for the plant and kidnap Jian Xiaohua. Ewu brought a knife over the criminal's head. This moment was incredibly tense. The guy's eyes gleamed with anger. The young man struck, but Liu Gisen closed his hand and was seriously injured. It was cold blood, that the cut hand is the price of the kidnapping, and now the bandit should leave the path. Liu Gisen turned around and astonishingly wandered away and could not believe he was alive, and the hero watched him with contempt. Ewu turned to a saved girl and said that now she is safe. The guy introduced himself. His name is Asheno, but the young beauty could call herself just a classmate. The girl was embarrassed, remembering their first meeting. But the young man said that everything was fine. He really went to the wrong bathroom, but don't worry. At first, the guy wanted to demand an explanation, but under the circumstances, it is better not to remember this. Suddenly, the door opened with a loud roar, and a huge truck crashed into the room. He was alerted and looked at the car that suddenly appeared for a few moments. Everything happened very quickly. The car ran into Yiwu, who had no time to bounce to the side. Jian Xiaohua saw this with horror. For a few moments, she froze in shock. A woman fell from the cab and hit the cement painfully, a rude voice coming from inside. A guy named Ling Kuni said that if someone does not receive treasures, they will certainly die today. Yiwu stood up, trying to recover after the commotion. The guy tried to distinguish who was so blind that he knocked him down. The unfortunate lady pointed to Yiwu and declared that this guy stole a treasure from the tomb. The young man clenched his teeth with anger. Once again, this insolent company stood in his way. Ling Kuni arrogantly asked how the young man did not die after such a blow and survived. Jian Xiaohua approached the guy and asked him how he feels. He was answered that he had broken his left hand and was in a slight numbness. Jian Xiaohua said that this can be fixed because she has several silver needles. She caught them in certain points. She can perform treatment. Yiwu replied that everything was in order. He has healing pills that will help him. The guy took out a magical pill and tried to swallow it, but suddenly Ling Kuni waved a knife at him. The guy took out a magical pill and tried to swallow it, but suddenly Ling Kuni waved a knife at him. Realizing that his opponent was not paying attention to him at all, Ling Kuni was indignant. Not only was he not going to give a treasure, but he also intends to heal. However, the young man declared despicably that he was not going to give anything to anyone. This treasure belongs to him. Ling Kuni materialized many sharp knives around them, smiled with a predatory smile, and said that he himself would take the artifact. The next moment, Yiwu and Jian Xiaohua were alarmed by the approaching knives. The young man covered a classmate and ordered her to be careful. Yiwu pushed his girlfriend back, darkening her from an imminent danger. In the next instant, the knives pierced the stone wall and crashed into it with a loud roar. A powerful explosion was heard. He did not stop covering the frightened Jian Xiaohua. Ling Kuni with malice noted that there are things that you cannot take and use for your own purposes. With desperation, he realized that due to the injury, he could not use his strength at full power. Meanwhile, the enemy was already approaching rapidly, smiling more predatorily every second. Ling Kuni said that this is the last chance. If he does not give ancient texts and the sword, he will regret it very much. But the next moment, the events took an even more serious turn. Jian Xiaohua entered a fight, grabbing a strong stick. The girl waved with strength and shouted so that the villain immediately brought the first patient. The very next moment, they were immediately brought up onto the stage, while he was still completely unconscious. The main doctor then stated that they had a critically ill patient right there, and now he was going to use traditional acupuncture needles to cure him on the spot, successfully demonstrating the truly miraculous properties of this product. Dr. Su slowly picked up one of those sharp needles, which was incredibly sharp and exhaled a very soft silver glow. It was a magical artifact indeed, which happened to be inside the doctor's pocket, and it suddenly shined with a brilliant, bright light. Su did not suspect a single thing and fully intended to carry out the ritual to its final end. But quite unexpectedly, the patient woke up and opened his eyes, looking around completely perplexed right in front of him. The doctor was absolutely indignant and simply could not understand what on earth was wrong with this actor and why he had woken up way ahead of schedule. Meanwhile, in that very moment, he looked all around himself completely bewildered, unable to comprehend where he had just received that pure spiritual energy from. But a second later, the guy realized that inside Su's pocket lay a mysterious object that gave him his strength back. Su hissed with deep anger, but without even understanding what was happening, he firmly ordered the young man to continue with his act and stop showing amateur performances, because otherwise he wouldn't receive any money at all. Yiwu suddenly realized exactly what was going on here, and he smiled quite astutely, immediately deciding to use this tricky situation to his own advantage. The young man flatly said that he did not need any money, but that he wanted to take the jade pendant instead, which was inside the doctor's pocket, because otherwise he would just stand right up and everyone present would easily understand that this entire thing was nothing but a fake production. Su reluctantly agreed, since he really had no other way out of this. Meiwu happily threw his head back and smiled rather broadly, very pleased with his own clever ingenuity. Su quickly ordered the young man to lie back down and behave quietly, acting as if he were still completely unconscious. As soon as the sharp needle touched Meiwu's body, he jumped up with lightning speed, and his entire body suddenly began to react. The people in the hall applauded with great enthusiasm, shouting that the doctor is truly a miracle worker, since with the simple help of a single needle, he can create such incredible things. He, while holding on to the painful ache, loudly complained that the doctor was being far too cruel, but Su coldly replied that this was the real price for his generic jade pendant. Su then told him that the pendant was located up on the second floor and that they must sign a formal agreement first. About 10 minutes passed, and he asked with great impatience when exactly he could finally receive his prize, but the doctor just smiled sinisterly and declared that they actually did not agree to that. Sensing that something was definitely wrong, the young man quickly asked what he was talking about, because they had a crystal clear agreement. However, the doctor sharply noted that the guy was simply trying to take unfair advantage of the situation to steal his precious jade pendant, but that this was absolutely impossible. He with utter contempt declared that Su was nothing but a miserable fraud, and furthermore, he wouldn't let him disgrace himself before the public, while he flatly refuses to keep his promise. Su saw that the young man looked very decisive and was stepping much closer to him, so the doctor loudly called out for his new guard who could help him out. The very next moment, a strong guy carrying a heavy club burst straight into the room and confidently declared that he had finally arrived. Wu calmly observed how these aggressive thugs started surrounding him from absolutely every side. Su said smugly that now the young man should feel very afraid. But suddenly he extended his hand right in front of him, taking Su completely by surprise. In the next instant, the young man struck the doctor with immense force, sending him flying until he crashed onto the ground, crumbling in pure pain, and he desperately ordered his subordinate to grab the insolent guy and teach him a lesson. Yes, Nu said out loud that he would definitely catch this miserable wretch and force him to apologize. He aggressively waved his heavy club, but the very next second, he missed entirely. Wu struck the enemy hard with his bare fist and said it was much better to give a jade to the doctor in a good way. Soon, he grabbed several more bandits, who looked at him with absolute horror. Wu showed no mercy during the intense fight, grabbing their clothes tightly and refusing to let go of his hands. The guy scattered his enemies around like useless trash and warned them that they would no longer mess around under his feet. Su watched what was happening with total horror, seeing his guards lying silently on the ground, proving that this actor was not simple at all. The doctor trembled with fear and pressed himself hard against the wall, while Wu slowly approached him. The guy said he was asking for the very last time whether he would give him the pendant or not. The unfortunate Su, with trembling hands, held out a piece of jewelry that emitted a strong magical energy. Wu angrily snatched the jade and with a smile noted that Su was behaving like a stubborn donkey. The young man turned around and headed straight for the exit, finally saying that a miserable fraud had already sold many fakes, tricking innocent people. Soon enough, the guy arrived at Aizhou University. After so much time, he had finally returned to his native walls. Zhang Jiben was very happy to greet his classmate, but he looked quite alarmed. He mentioned that there was recently a strict check at the school, and Yiwu had not attended classes for a very long time, so he must be careful. But the next moment, Zhang Jiben noticed that the guy was already sitting in a meditative pose. The guy slumped over the desk and said that in this case, he would also just rest and not make any noise. He fully understood that this jade pendant collects a massive amount of aura, which was ideally suited for the cultivation of his clairvoyance. The young man looked right in front of him and saw several people, including an elderly master known as Old Jin. He mentioned that there were highly valuable things buried deep underground, and they had concluded a good construction contract. The last time, a fragment of an ancient stone tablet was dug up in this exact place, on which the task of 10,000 treasures was written, a name that sounded like a good product. Wu closed his eyes and in total confusion slowly repeated those words, the task of 10,000 treasures. The very next moment, Zhang Jiben discovered with absolute horror that his friend had completely vanished from his chair, and he sat down discouraged on the floor for several moments, unable to understand what was happening. The student looked all around in complete confusion, but his friend's trail had already disappeared entirely. Meanwhile, Wu ran with all his might directly to the construction site. Now the guy finally realized what was truly happening. The task is about 10,000 treasures. Could this be the ancient legacy of the Yinjun sect? Is it really hidden here? Suddenly, Wu heard a formidable loud cry right by his side, realizing that a regular guy shouldn't be in this dangerous place. The men who approached him thought that this young youth was simply trying to earn some extra money here. Recently, the economy has not been at its best, and many come here looking for any work. He did not argue and readily agreed to that. The man patted the newcomer on the shoulder and said that if he proved to be suitable after the trial period, he would be officially hired to work. But suddenly, a door slammed shut with a very loud bang, a sound so strange that the man turned around instantly. Judging by the sound, a bad accident had just occurred and one of the employees was in grave danger. It was absolutely necessary to run to the scene as fast as possible, right? He received a message indicating that he should follow them too. The construction workers approached a huge deep pit, a place so dangerous that it felt completely overwhelming, much like the last time when several people tragically died. Another gentleman arrived at the scene and asked everyone present to step back immediately. Old Jin also approached slowly. The man walked fearlessly right up to the edge, but the boys quickly asked the boss to be very careful. However, Old Jin firmly stated that no one else would adapt, and he would personally find out the situation down there and report back on it in the end. In the hands of the old man, there was an ancient device that displayed the level of energy and spiritual power. An elderly man declared that the green dragon took its place, while the white tiger fell from the mountains. This place definitely possesses a powerful spiritual energy. The supply officer then approached and asked how things were going and whether there were any traces of blood. The old man responded that there are actually many of them right here. The guy smiled in a very formal manner as it was highly welcome news, and he was absolutely glad to be able to finally obtain wealth. The guy named Lin was then informed by Old Jin that he needed to find a group of workers and quickly send them to intelligence, since it was necessary to gather as many people as possible, and the bandit stated that he would prepare the cannon fodder in the best possible way. Soon enough, a sufficient army was successfully gathered. At the head was a guy who mentioned that in a collapsed crypt full of treasures, the authorities had asked people to go there, and absolutely anyone could sign up. Many builders readily volunteered to go down into the mine in search of treasures. Wu also expressed his own desire to help, although the guy clearly had his own hidden motives and secret benefits. The team leader stated that in this case it is absolutely necessary to prepare, and everyone can go down into the mine. The contractor then told Linia that he had already gained the exact right number of people. The guy replied that this was excellent. The villain stated that everyone could follow along with him, but extreme care must be observed. The boys were glad, believing that having reached the cave, they would find treasures and finally become rich. After a moment, they fell, stepping onto a cold, rocky floor. Lin noticed that this place is quite spacious, not like a cemetery at all. He thought to himself that in this place, the spiritual energy is much stronger than the outside, so perhaps there is a mine right here. A huge and luxurious building appeared up ahead, completely mismatched with the gloomy surroundings. Lin exclaimed in surprise. It seems that the palace is simply incredible, that they have managed to find such a building. The builders shouted with joy and admiration that this place is an ancient relic, and the treasures must be hidden within these ruins. The boys rushed forward with enthusiasm, all intending to be the very first to enter and take as many jewels as possible. He was in no hurry to follow them. The guy realized that such an architectural style is very similar to the one from 2,000 years ago, so perhaps there really is a tower of thousands of treasures. The builders already made their way through and cleared the stones with enthusiasm, rejoicing that they would truly become rich. But suddenly, something went wrong, as the ground beneath their feet began to tremble sharply, and the people inside could barely stand. The contractor was highly surprised and could not understand what was happening, and the building actually collapsed once again. Suddenly, a translucent figure appeared before the astonished people, asking who dared to invade the shower hall. He, who at that moment hid behind the stone with the intention of going unnoticed, saw that in front of him a millennial soul. Lin was also surprised, and the guy wondered if it didn't seem to him that ancient spirits still exist in this place. The builders quickly ran away, completely in panic, because they faced a real ghost from which it was not clear what to expect. However, several more ghosts appeared directly out of nowhere and declared that any offender would be sentenced to death, but they were blocked by the worried people. At the next moment, the ghostly perfumes used a magical attack that went straight to the builders. The brigadier, in a daze, called Lin, and the man was confused and did not know what to do. Lin did not lose his composure, and with a satisfied smile he applied magical skills and threw many knives, running forward completely sure of success. The sharp blades pierced the bodies of the spirits, forcing them to scream in surprise. The translucent flesh still succumbed to the attack. The contractor was delighted that if Mr. Lin took care of business, everything always goes according to plan. The perfumes looked at each other. A cultivator, a worthy opponent, clearly stood in front of them. Lin threw a new portion of knives, for if these perfumes survived for 10,000 years, then they probably know where the Tower of Thousands of Treasures is, in which case he decided to interrogate one of them. However, in response, the powerful spirit launched a burning dragon. The monster ran right at Lin, and he was numb with fear of an imminent threat. The burning beast released a powerful stream of energy that caused the man to shudder. He flew to the side and crashed against the wall with a roar as the blow was far too strong to resist. The guy crashed into the stone behind which he was hiding. The young man carefully looked out. Meanwhile, the ghost resolutely declared that this was his territory and the adjusters would be destroyed. He stood up, feeling an incredible surge of aggression. Noticing him next to Yiwu, the villain decided to use him as a shield from the next blow. The ghost swung a weapon, stating the offender must be destroyed. The blow fell directly on Yiwu's body, and the guy for a moment was numb and screamed in pain. Lin took advantage of the moment and quickly fled. Everything is over. Here not only perfumes, but also his powerful cultivation. Unfortunately, he managed to find a scapegoat. Suddenly, the guy turned around and saw that Yiwu began to move. Instead of dying, the hero stood up calmly, looking quite healthy. The angry young man asked the ghost if he really likes beating people. They stood on the floor around the magic circle, glowing with a bright red light. Suddenly, drops incredibly sharp needles began to drip from the ceiling. This attack could cut the spirit into many small parts, which was highly surprising. At the next moment, a powerful explosion was heard, and he calmly observed what was happening. Lin could not believe his eyes. How it is even possible? This guy is incredibly strong. However, this incident did not leave the other ghosts indifferent, and they longed to avenge their older brother. One of them caused an evil python that hissed and protected its venomous tongue, looking for a victim. Yiwu squeezed a magic lamp in his hands, sealing their souls, since with its help, he could avoid this attack. The young man activated the technique of uniting the soul, and at the exact same moment, the strong chains exploded. The powerful python, which intended to destroy him, could not resist this power and was captured. The ghost realized that the matter was bad, as this lamp could seal souls and they had no protection against it. The only thing left was to hide as soon as possible to save their lives. But the spirits had no time, and as soon as they rushed to the exit, the pink chains reached them and captured them. The unfortunate victims contracted, but it was impossible to get out. The contractor realized that this guy, a master of martial arts, was strange to pass himself off as a simple builder. He was holding a lamp in his hands, and voices were heard discussing his strength, for even they did not suspect this before. Ling cleared his throat and approached, although it was difficult to admit it. But the young man did well. The guy decided not to take a break and tried to leave. He turned to Yiwu and suggested that he was probably from the San sect. He explained his behavior with the desire to check on the young man because he had been staring at him for a very long time.
Él sonrió bien, de manera innatural y agradeció la oportunidad. Internamente se regocijó. Lin ni siquiera adivinó quién era en realidad, lo que significa que el disfraz funciona. Los constructores decidieron que el señor Lin tiene una visión increíble, si no fuera por él, habrían muerto. Notó sospechosamente que estaba rodeado por una multitud de sumideros, pero no dijo nada en voz alta. Lin dejó de hablar y anunció que no debería perder el tiempo. Debe haber muchos tesoros en el interior, y debe continuar la búsqueda. En ese momento, notó una figura increíble que parecía de la nada. Fue un espíritu sobreviviente que intentó esconderse en silencio, arrastrándose a la salida. Lin con desprecio lo presionó al suelo, mientras que el resto se separó en busca de tesoros. El tipo se acercó al prisionero y señaló que tiene un talento increíble y que claramente no es fácil. Lin exigió que el espíritu dijera dónde la torre es miles de tesoros. ¿Qué pasó? Escuchó esta conversación escuchó involuntariamente. También estaba interesado en esta torre. El fantasma con desprecio en la cara de Lin y declaró que no diría nada. El villano se balanceó, porque la negligencia del fantasma lo enfureció mucho y declaró que merece la muerte. Sin embargo, el espíritu solo sonrió y respondió que incluso si muriera, llevaría a alguien más con él. Al momento siguiente hubo una poderosa explosión. Lin se fue al instante, intentando instintivamente salvar su vida. Golpeó el suelo fuertemente, golpeando dolorosamente en el piso de piedra. El capataz en un aturdimiento miró al tipo que cayó frente a él, claramente sorprendido por lo que estaba sucediendo. El hombre se apresuró a ayudar a Lin a levantarse y preguntó si todo estaba en orden con él. El tipo se despidió nerviosamente y dijo con irritación que no podría pasarle nada malo. Algo sorprendente apareció adelante, y Lin, como el resto, miró este fenómeno con asombro. Wu también se acercó. El joven entendió lo que estaba sucediendo aquí. Un fenómeno inusual hizo que todos estuvieran alerta. El tipo sintió una fuerte energía espiritual emitiendo vibraciones poderosas. Lin ordenó a los constructores que dejaran las cosas y los siguieran adentro. El líder del equipo recurrió a los trabajadores, diciendo que si no querían morir, deberían seguirlo. Después de las dudas cortas, los constructores aún estuvieron de acuerdo, ya no había vuelto. Apresurando su aliento, entraron en lo desconocido, comenzando desde el suelo y saltando. Cuando todos se abrieron paso, una cueva de montaña se abrió frente a ellos, en la que los diamantes se extendieron de debajo del suelo. Wu ahora entendió que este lugar, la mina de los espíritus, tenía todo en su lugar. El resto de los muchachos se miraron, asombrados por el descubrimiento. Ninguno de ellos sospechaba la existencia de tal lugar. Lin le dio una bofetada al contratista y le ordenó que avanzara para explorar la situación. El hombre se puso pálido, era increíblemente peligroso, y el miedo lo limitó. Sin embargo, Lin ni siquiera iba a escuchar objeciones y ordenó que su subordinado fuera sin conversaciones innecesarias. El desafortunado capataz, que había tropezado, cayó al suelo, junto a la dispersión de diamantes. Se convirtió en piedra. Mirando a su alrededor, rezó en silencio, esperando que no hubiera peligro en su camino. Pronto, el empleado se dio la vuelta y le dijo a Lin que todo estaba limpio y que no había amenazas por delante. Pero no se dio cuenta de cómo una sombra siniestra, un leopardo salvaje formidable apareció detrás. En el siguiente instante, la bestia rápidamente saltó y agarró a su víctima con fuerza. Lo único que el capataz logró hacer fue gritar en voz alta. Los constructores y Lin se congelaron con horror, incapaces de creer sus ojos. En el mismo momento, los muchachos se apresuraron a correr, no queriendo enfrentar al monstruo. Mientras tanto, el enorme leopardo gruñó y los trabajadores intentaron desesperadamente esconderse. Sin embargo, uno de ellos no pudo escapar lo suficientemente rápido. La bestia lo alcanzó. El leopardo reunió un poderoso coágulo de energía cerca de él, emitiendo luz deslumbrante. Este bulto de energía se apresuró a correr a las personas, obligándolas en un pánico en diferentes direcciones. Pero pronto la energía los alcanzó, y desde el golpe se dispararon en el aire. Lin tembló de miedo. Este lugar era completamente impredecible, incluso los animales espirituales vivían aquí. Mientras tanto, el leopardo declaró amenazadoramente que cualquiera que invade su territorio debería morir. Lin agarró el arma, tratando de parecer beligerante y dijo en voz alta que no tenía miedo de los ataques. Pero la poderosa bestia solo sonrió y corrió hacia adelante con un gruñido. Lin se hizo más frío con miedo, no podía creer que esto fuera posible. La bestia se acercaba rápidamente, y parecía que la muerte era inevitable. Al momento siguiente, el leopardo se aferró a la mano del hombre, apretándolo en poderosas mandíbulas. Era simplemente increíble. Lin con horror observaba lo que estaba sucediendo, sus ojos se abrieron de miedo. Llamó desesperadamente al rescate, con la esperanza de que uno de los trabajadores lo escuchara. Lentamente se quitó la pintura de su rostro, finalmente revelando la verdadera personalidad. Si este bastardo todavía no lo ha reconocido, por lo que descaradamente pidió ayuda. Lin retrocedió con horror. Esta reunión fue completamente inesperada para él. No creía que el destino lo reduciría nuevamente. Con una sonrisa fría, notó que su oponente ya no podía esconderse. Lin en un aturdimiento miró a su enemigo. El siguiente instante, el villano se apresuró a correr, con la esperanza de salvar su vida. Estaba apretando una espada afilada en sus manos y cuidó al corredor con una sonrisa depredadora. Lin escuchó un ruido extraño detrás de él, el tipo se dio la vuelta, esperando que la persecución solo lo desvaneciera. Pero el siguiente instante, su espada golpeó, el dolor perforó el cuerpo, obligándolo a estremecerse. Lin cayó al suelo, ya no mostraba signos de vida, fue asesinado. El leopardo no podía creer en sus ojos, estos dos fueron discutidos seriamente, y uno de ellos era más fuerte. Notó que convertirse en una bestia espiritual en ese lugar es realmente talento. El leopardo con desprecio declaró que ninguna persuasión lo obligaría a ahorrar a una persona común. Este es su territorio, y no hay perdón aquí. Sin embargo, en el cuerpo de había una poderosa energía espiritual que podía ser útil. El leopardo decidió dejarlo vivo. El tipo señaló que la bestia sigue siendo una bestia, salvaje e ignorante, mientras que miró significativamente a su enemigo. El joven sugirió una alternativa, en lugar de una batalla sin sentido. Concluyó un acuerdo que es beneficioso para ambos. El leopardo estaba alerta y preguntó qué tenía en mente exactamente. Egu explicó que podría compartir energía, pero a cambio quiere obtener información. El leopardo resopló con desprecio, diciendo que las personas insignificantes no tienen derecho a negociar con él. La bestia se enojó y se apresuró hacia adelante, diciendo que merece la muerte por tal audacia. Pero el joven concentró su fuerza y respondió que si un leopardo no quiere negociar, entonces tendrá que luchar. Al momento siguiente, la bestia sintió una poderosa presión que lo hizo congelarse y pensar. Anglulando ante este increíble tipo, el leopardo se disculpó por su error. Egu se suavizó, sonrió y dijo que ahora pueden continuar el diálogo constructivo. La bestia con voz temblorosa dijo que hasta que el joven lo matara. Estaba listo para hablar con él sobre cualquier cosa. Hablaba en serio, él hizo la única pregunta si hay una torre de miles de tesoros aquí. El leopardo preguntó con sorpresa, disminuyó la velocidad y pensó durante unos segundos. El tipo instantáneamente le puso la espada en la garganta y advirtió que no toleraría los trucos. Necesitaba la verdad. El leopardo asustado respondió apresuradamente que la torre realmente existe. Él indicó la dirección y dijo que ella debería estar allí, aunque él mismo estaba extremadamente confundido. Egu inmediatamente salió a la carretera, advirtiendo que era mejor no tratar de engañar a la bestia.
After a short while, the young man was finally in the right place, where massive brick walls rose up right in front of him, visibly exuding a strange blue energy. He was deeply frowning, thinking it was all a complete joke. The legendary Tower of Thousands of Treasures turned out to be an ancient structure, and right ahead of him, there was only a bizarre pile of strange bricks. The leopard then explained that these blue bricks are actually burned during the construction of this very same tower. When Wu irritably noticed that he was strictly looking for completely unbroken bricks, the beast calmly explained that people had once dug the spiritual mines right here, carefully burned the materials they obtained, and then used them for the entire construction. Although where the actual tower stands right now is entirely unknown. Highly angered, the young man said that this useless beast brought absolutely no benefit and instantly decided to kill him. However, looking closely at the jade pendant, he suddenly changed his mind. Even if it were not possible to find the Tower of Thousands of Treasures, this specific place would still bring him a great benefit. The guy then decided to collect all the spiritual energy that had accumulated around here. The leopard was utterly surprised to think that this hero possesses an unusually powerful vessel that could easily absorb the energy instantaneously. Meanwhile, the young man raised his hand and noted that the jewels, although they are quite cheap, are still of great benefit. The leopard bowed low toward him and desperately begged to be taken along, explaining that life here completely depends on the spiritual energy, and if he takes it all away, the beast is absolutely doomed. Alright, in the end, a good companion could certainly have a special premium track. Meanwhile, old Jin was waiting very anxiously at the construction site. He simply did not understand why everything was dragging on so much and began to seriously suspect that something truly grave had happened. Suddenly, the man turned around and saw something right in front of him that made him tremble with fear. He, appearing instantly on the spot, waved his hand and calmly said that he had just come out of the mine. He claimed that he was merely a temporary worker at this construction site and just like everyone else, he simply completed his assigned tasks. Old Jin strictly asked where the rest of the workers were located, since not a single soul was visible anywhere. After a brief pause, the young man softly replied that everyone had been brutally killed and absolutely no one survived. These unexpected words deeply shocked the older man. His eyes opened wide in total surprise, and his mouth fell open. With a heavy sigh, he added that many monsters suddenly appeared inside the mine, and the workers willingly gave their lives to protect him. With these words, he boldly declared that he was leaving, and defiantly walked further away. Old Jin looked at the guy with complete incredulity, as it was perfectly obvious that he had decided to wrap him around his finger. A single moment later, the Master of Elders raised his hand, which quickly transformed into huge and extremely sharp claws. As he moved forward, Old Jin shouted from behind so that the guy would not even try to trick him because he is far too young. With these words, the old man swung around and Awu, having absolutely no time to react properly, fell heavily to the ground. The young man turned around with deep contempt, showing a volatile mixture of anger and rage that he held inside. The old man firmly said that he should not deceive him, that he is not clever enough to pull this off, and that he must say what actually happened in reality. Suddenly, the guy smiled, thinking that it is now perfectly clear that the old man possesses valuable information about the Tower of Thousands of Treasures, so it is much better to pretend to be weak in order to discover absolutely everything. He asked for forgiveness and promised to tell the whole story. When they entered, they found many valuables, but they also collided with dangerous spirits and monsters, and Mr. Lin unfortunately died at the hands of those monsters. Old Jin asked if that was really all, but wondered what happened to the other treasures. For instance, any specific information regarding the Tower of Thousands of Treasures. The young man then said that he remembered there were indeed bricks from this tower, but the building itself completely disappeared. This piece of news greatly surprised the old man, as it was truly difficult to imagine that this could even be possible. He looked at Old Jin with an imploring gaze and stated that he did not know what Tower of Thousands of Treasures he meant, nor why it is even necessary. After thinking for a brief moment, the old man muttered that if the guy is going to die anyway, then he might as well tell him. Many years ago, the Van San sect successfully discovered a hidden monument to the In-Yun sect, where thousands of treasures were explicitly mentioned. It is widely rumored that rare cultivation techniques were carefully stored there, and if it could be found, it would certainly be an invaluable discovery. Ewu rose up and immediately asked if there were any other tips regarding the Tower of Thousands of Treasures. Old Jin, with deep indignation, asked what on earth this guy was doing, and how he even dared to stand up without explicit permission. However, the young man just smiled and said that he merely wanted to obtain more detailed information, but the old man had only spoken absolute nonsense. Old Jin once again released his enormous hand and declared that he would never tolerate such a ridiculous mockery. The old man added that the guy seemed to have truly decided to end his life today, seeing how bravely he was behaving. Without saying a single word, he picked up a sharp sword that vibrated with magical impulses. The fierce battle began. Old Jin glared at the youth in pure anger, tightly clenching his teeth. He said he had allowed the old man to boast a little bit, but did he really think he had any right to brag about such an utterly useless power? At the very next moment, Old Jin, under the powerful impact of a devastating blow, flew violently to one side. The man collapsed heavily onto the ground, painfully striking his back against the hard stone. Huh? With a cold, sinister smile, the young man quickly advanced toward the master, dangerously brandishing his weapons. He brought the sharp sword closer to the old man's throat and calmly stated that he could still be quite useful. If he is fully ready to obey, he might just save his life. The guy proudly stated that he belonged to In-Yun and strictly stared down at the older man. Old Jin simply could not believe his own eyes, thinking it was totally impossible since the In-Yun school had actually ceased to exist a very long time ago. He firmly said that he had absolutely no intention of explaining anything at all. If the old man is truly ready to continue investigating the rumors about the Tower of Thousands of Treasures, he will be granted a single chance at mercy. Jin quickly agreed with a visibly trembling voice. The guy then ordered the master to open his mouth wider, watching him quite anxiously, entirely unable to comprehend what the young man was planning to do. Ewu then gave the old man a small pill with truly incredible properties. Old Jin bowed with deep fear and asked what kind of potion it actually was. The guy coldly replied that this is a deadly venom that acts every 10 days, but it has a specific antidote. If the old man is completely obedient and does not try to deceive him, he might easily obtain it. Ewu carefully noted to himself that it was genuinely dangerous today, and that he had spent a massive amount of energy. But fortunately, everything worked out well. Suddenly, the young man felt a treacherous rumbling sound inside his stomach, realizing it was finally time to take a quick break. Wu decided that he urgently needed to find a place where he could resolve these sudden stomach problems. The guy walked into the thick bushes, but suddenly something alerted him, and he turned around in complete surprise. At the next moment, his gaze became even more cautious as he saw something entirely unexpected. Hian Xiao was sitting right on the ground, calling out loudly for help because this pervert had suddenly appeared right in front of her once again. The girl forcefully pushed him back, quickly covering her eyes with her hand so as to not witness this absolute shame. Hian Xiaowao angrily said that she had made a massive effort just to find him, and yet he was looking behind her once more. The guy desperately tried to explain that this was all a simple misunderstanding. Yiwu, with a warm and reassuring smile, asked why the girl was even in this remote place. The young woman turned away and said that if she hadn't been deeply worried about his life, she wouldn't be asking people for directions all along the way. The young man humbly begged forgiveness for his guilt and offered to fully compensate for everything by buying her food or something else. The girl looked at the guy in total surprise, wondering where on earth he obtained that kind of money, as all of this appeared highly suspicious. He proudly displayed the jewels he had found inside the mine and said that this would certainly be more than enough. Hian Xiao simply could not hold back her emotions. This guy had clearly gone crazy, as he possessed a literal mountain of gold. The good-natured young man then invited her to freely choose whichever decoration she liked best. The girl really loved this idea. Hian Xiao laughed cheerfully and said that, in that case, she would gladly accept his generous gift. She carefully chose a beautiful bracelet that was placed on her left hand, and all of this seemed completely incredible. The girl actually just wanted to play a joke, but the guy had truly given her absolutely everything she wanted. Yiwu then suggested that they go together to sell the newly found items. However, the guy did not mention where he had obtained all these things, and he answered all her questions by saying she shouldn't ask so many things. Soon enough, the young man, together with his companion, arrived at a small shop where precious jewelry was regularly taken. Wu thought to himself that in this current era, antiquities are highly popular, and it is definitely worth obtaining such unique items. The buyer was genuinely interested. The man was completely shocked upon looking closely at the stone. This object was so uniquely rare that it easily exceeded the total value of all the treasures inside his shop. However, these two youths did not impress serious and ambitious people at all, so one could easily try to reduce the price. The old man, with visible
El anciano con
disappointment, placed
decepción
the
puso
stone
la
back
piedra
upon
sobre
the
la
table,
mesa y,
and with
con
a
un
heavy sigh,
suspiro,
said
dijo
that he
que
was
lo
truly
lamentaba
sorry.
mucho.
Although
Aunque
the
la
item
cosa
is in
está en
quite
buenas
good condition,
condiciones,
it
no
is
es
not
demasiado
excessively
antigua
ancient,
y, por
and
lo
therefore,
tanto,
it is
no es
not
de
of
gran
great
valor.
value.
Miró al
He then looked at
comerciante
the
con
merchant with clear
desconfianza,
distrust,
porque hace
because
2000 años
2000
este
years
era un
ago, this
término
was
muy
actually
decente.
considered a
El
very
joven
decent
tomó la
term.
piedra en sus
The young
manos y
man
dijo
took the
que en
stone
este
into his
caso
own
irían a
hands
otro
and
lugar.
stated that,
El
in
anciano
this case, they
inmediatamente
would
se
simply
animó
go
y se
somewhere
apresuró a
else.
decir que
The old
uno
man
no debería
immediately cheered up
apresurarse
and
con
quickly
tales
hastened to say
decisiones.
that one
Wu
should
con una
definitely
ligera
not rush
sonrisa
into
se dio
such
la
important
vuelta.
decisions.
El comerciante
Wu,
todavía
with a
decidió
slight
comprar
smile,
algo
turned
que
around.
acababa de llamar
The
no
merchant
demasiado
had still
antiguo.
decided to buy
El hombre
something that
trató de
he had just
explicar
called
que no
not too
debería ser
ancient.
entendido
The man tried to
incorrectamente,
explain that
solo
he should
quería
not be
reducir el
misunderstood,
precio.
as he
Pero
only wanted to
realmente
reduce
tiene
the
la
price,
intención de
but he
comprar una
genuinely
piedra.
intends to
Habiendo
purchase the
pensado
stone.
un poco,
After thinking
el
for a moment,
comerciante
the
dijo que
merchant
estaba
stated
listo
that he
para
was ready to
ofrecer
offer
5
5
millones,
million.
en su opinión.
In his own opinion,
Esto es
this is more
suficiente.
than enough.
Inmediatamente
He
lo
immediately corrected him,
corrigió,
saying that they were
diciendo que
only
estaban
satisfied with the
satisfechos
full
con
amount
solo la
of 50
cantidad de
million.
50
The
millones.
merchant appeared
El
extremely
comerciante
discouraged,
parecía
as such a
extremadamente
massive amount
desanimado.
clearly did
Tal
not fit inside
cantidad
his head.
claramente no
The young
encajaba
man
en
was
su
just about to
cabeza.
leave,
El
saying that if
joven
the old
estaba a
man did
punto
not
de
agree,
irse,
he would surely
diciendo que
find
si el
another
viejo
shop,
no estaba de
but he
acuerdo,
immediately declared that he
encontraría otra
accepted to
tienda.
buy the stone.
Pero inmediatamente
clarified
declaró
that
que
he would
aceptó
hand over the
comprar una
stone as soon
piedra.
as he receives the
Wu
money,
aclaró que
and not in
transmitiría
any
la
other
piedra
way.
tan
The
pronto
old
como
man did not
reciba
object
dinero,
and
y
handed
no
over
de
the
otra
check for
manera.
50 million.
El viejo no se
This
opuso
deal
y
was
entregó el
definitely
cheque
worth the
por
trouble.
50 millones.
Hian Xiao
Este
was
acuerdo
completely shocked to
definitivamente
observe
valió
what
la
was
pena.
happening.
Jian
thinking,
Xiao
how
se
on earth
sorprendió
this
al
could be
observar
possible?
lo que estaba
Because 50 million
sucediendo,
is an
volverse
incredibly
loco
large
como
amount.
sea posible.
Soon enough, the
Porque
youth
50
left. He
millones,
proposed to
esta
go
es una
somewhere and
gran
celebrate a
cantidad.
successful deal
Pronto,
properly.
los muchachos se
Meanwhile,
fueron.
the old man
Propuso ir
dialed
a
the
algún
number
lado
and
y
informed his
celebrar un
boss
trato
that he had just
exitoso
caught some very big
correctamente.
fish.
Mientras
Most
tanto,
likely,
el
these
viejo
young people
marcó el
still
número e
possess some
informó
very
a su
good
jefe
things.
que acababa de
Some time
atrapar
passed.
peces
A
grandes
taxi
y,
rushed down the street.
probablemente,
It was already
estos
quite
jóvenes
dark, and the
todavía
road was
tienen
almost
cosas buenas.
entirely empty.
Pasó algún tiempo,
Jian Xiao
un taxi
wanted to
corrió
get
por
to
la
know her
calle.
classmate
Ya
much
estaba
closer
oscuro y
and
el
asked him
camino
where he
estaba
was
casi
from.
vacío.
The guy
Jian
replied
Xiao quería
evasively that
conocer
he
a su
came from a
compañero de
very
clase
wealthy
más
family.
cerca y le preguntó
This
dónde
was not
estaba.
entirely
El
true,
tipo
but the
respondió
young man did not want
evasivamente
to go
que era
into
de una
details and
familia
explain
rica.
highly complex
Esto no era
things.
del todo cierto,
Meanwhile, another
pero el
car
joven
suddenly
no quería
appeared on the
entrar en
road,
detalles
which
y
rushed at
explicar
high
cosas
speed,
complejas.
fully intending
Mientras
to
tanto,
overtake
otro
absolutely
auto
all the
apareció en la
cars.
carretera,
The driver
que
was
corrió a
remarkably
alta
nervous,
velocidad,
tightly
con la
gripping the steering
intención
wheel
de
with
superar a
force
todos
and
los
demanding that
autos.
everyone
El
give way.
conductor estaba
He was
notablemente
clearly late for an
nervioso,
important technique.
apretando el volante
Suddenly,
con fuerza
something
y
went wrong.
exigiendo que
The
todos
wheel
cedan.
developed a crack, and a loud
Claramente
click
llegó tarde a
resounded.
una técnica
This was not
importante.
enough.
De repente,
The driver
algo
abruptly
salió
pulled
mal.
over to the
La
side of the
rueda
road
dio
and
una
clenched
grieta
his
y un
teeth
fuerte
in pure
clic sonó.
anger.
Esto
The
no
car
fue
moved along
suficiente.
an
El
uncontrollable
conductor llamó
trajectory,
bruscamente
and
al
the collision
costado de la
seemed completely
carretera y
inevitable.
apretó los dientes
Wu
con
noticed this
enojado.
with his
El
peripheral
auto se
vision
movió a
and
lo largo
immediately
de una
realized what was
trayectoria
happening behind
incontrolada,
them.
y la
Without
colisión
any
parecía
hesitation,
inevitable.
the young man grabbed
EW
Jian
notó
Xiao
esto
up,
con visión
intending to
lateral e
protect her from the
inmediatamente
imminent
se dio
danger.
cuenta de lo que
At the
estaba
very next
sucediendo
moment, a
detrás.
collision
Sin
occurred.
dudarlo, el
Smoke
joven
rose up
agarró a
and
Jian
completely
Xiao
enveloped the
con la
surroundings.
intención de
The
protegerla del
driver, in
peligro
a fit of
inminente.
rage, stepped
Al
out into
momento
the street.
siguiente,
His
ocurrió una
car, which he had
colisión.
only
El humo
recently
se
bought,
elevó
was
y
almost
envolvió los
completely wrecked.
alrededores. El
Meanwhile,
conductor
he asked
con
his
ira
friend
salió
how
a
she
la
was
calle.
feeling, and the
Su
girl
automóvil,
replied that
que
everything
solo
was
compró
perfectly fine.
recientemente,
The angry guy
casi
went
se
straight
estrelló.
to the taxi
Mientras
driver and
tanto,
demanded that
él
he
le
come out
preguntó a su
immediately
amiga
for
cómo se
confrontation.
siente. La
The
niña
taxi driver
respondió
tried
que
to
todo
explain
estaba
that
en
there was a
orden.
solid line
El
and
tipo
it
de
was
enojado
impossible
fue
to
al
change
taxista y
lanes.
le exigió
However,
que fuera
the angry guy did
inmediatamente
not
para
listen
un
to him at all
enfrentamiento.
and struck
El
his face
taxista
with a
trató de
powerful
explicar
slap.
que había
The
una
guy
línea
demanded that the
sólida y era
unfortunate
imposible
driver
cambiar
fully
el
compensate
carril.
for his
Sin
losses,
embargo,
because the
un
car
tipo
is now
enojado no
completely
lo
unfit.
escuchó y golpeó
When the
su
taxi
bofetada
driver
en la
said
cara
that he had
con fuerza.
absolutely no
El
money,
tipo
the
exigió
villain
que el
clenched his fist and
desafortunado
fully
conductor
intended to strike
compensara
him.
sus
Suddenly,
pérdidas,
Iwu,
porque el
tightly grabbed his
automóvil
hand,
ahora no es
fought back with
adecuado.
his hand,
Cuando el
completely
taxista
suppressing the
dijo
blow.
que no
The
tenía
scoundrel
dinero,
looked at him in
el
a
villano
perplexed
apretó
manner
su
and
puño y
asked who he
tenía la
was
intención de
and why on earth
golpearlo.
he was
De
intervening in his
repente,
dispute.
Ewu,
Iwu
quien
calmly
agarró su
replied
mano,
that it was the
luchó
driver
con
who
su
had
mano,
behaved recklessly,
reprimiendo el
and
golpe.
now he is
El
demanding that others
sinvergüenza lo miró de
compensate for
manera
his own
perpleja y
damage.
le preguntó
The
quién
angry
era
guy
y por
shook
qué
his fist at
interviene
him
en su
once more,
desmontaje.
intending to
Ewu
strike
respondió
Iwu,
con calma
his
que era el
eyes burning
conductor
with
quien se
intense
comportó
rage. When the
imprudentemente.
enemy tried to
Y ahora
attack,
exige que
he
otros
simply could
compensen
not
su
do
daño.
this, since he
El
was
tipo
under the
enojado
protection of
volvió
an
a
invisible
agitarle el
shield.
puño, con la
The villain was
intención de
totally
golpear al
stunned and could
W.
not
Sus
comprehend what
ojos
was
ardieron de
happening.
ira.
At
Cuando el
the next
enemigo
moment,
intentó
he was
atacar,
shocked to
no
find
pudo
that he
hacer
had
esto.
completely disappeared.
Ya que estaba
The
bajo
young
la
man was
protección de
standing
un
right
escudo
behind him,
invisible,
grabbed him
el
by the
villano
shoulder,
estaba
and with a
aturdido y no
smirk,
podía
asked where
entender lo que
exactly
estaba
he was looking.
sucediendo. Al
The guy
momento
collapsed
siguiente,
heavily to the
se
ground,
sorprendió al
holding his
descubrir
cheek,
que había
which was burning from the
desaparecido.
blow.
El joven
His
estaba
parents had
detrás
never
de
beaten
él,
him,
lo
and yet
agarró
some
por el
random
hombro y
passerby
con una
dares to
sonrisa
do this.
preguntó dónde
At the
estaba
next moment,
mirando.
the
El
bastard
tipo se
pulled a sharp
derrumbó al
knife out of his
suelo,
pocket,
agarrando
which
su
he always
mejilla
kept with
ardiendo
him.
del
The
golpe.
enemy grabbed it
Sus padres
abruptly
nunca
and
vencieron
pointed
y
it
algún
directly at
transeúnte
Iwu,
se atreve a
saying
hacer
that he would
esto.
never forgive
Al
him for
momento
such a
siguiente,
deep
el
humiliation.
bastardo sacó un
However,
cuchillo de
the
su
young man
bolsillo,
remained
que
perfectly
siempre
calm
guardaba
and
con él.
effortlessly
El
intercepted
enemigo
his
lo
hand
agarró
in which he held
bruscamente
the
y lo
knife.
instruyó sobre
This
el
stunned the
W,
bastard even more,
diciendo que no
and
lo
he looked
perdonaría por
completely
tal
bewildered.
humillación.
A massive
Sin
arrow
embargo,
with a sharp
el
point
joven
suddenly
permaneció
flew
tranquilo
directly
y sin
toward him.
esfuerzo
Ewu
interceptó
was
su mano en la
genuinely
que había un
surprised.
cuchillo. sonido. Esto aún más aturdido al bastardo, y se veía completamente confundido. Una flecha enorme con una punta aguda voló hacia él. Ewu se sorprendió al salir de donde podría provenir la flecha en ese lugar. Al momento siguiente, el joven empujó hábilmente a su enemigo hacia la flecha. El tipo recibió una herida grave en la espalda. Todo su cuerpo se estremeció. El impudente con un rugido se derrumbó sobre el asfalto y dejó de mostrar signos de vida. Ewu le dijo al conductor del taxi y a Hyun Xiaowa que se quedara en su lugar y no se movieran. Mientras tanto, apareció una silueta oscura a la vuelta de la esquina. Era una chica que disparó desde un arco. Ewu saltó bruscamente y se congeló por un momento, reflexionando sobre otras acciones. El tipo miró a su alrededor con confusión, tratando de entender dónde desapareció su enemigo. Xianxiahua fue al joven y le preguntó severamente si estaba realmente conectado con los bandidos. La niña tomó su mano y lo arrastró a un lugar seguro, diciendo que era peligroso estar aquí. Pronto, Xianxiahua lo llevó a un gran edificio de múltiples historietas y fue a una de las puertas. Ella dijo que este era su hostal, y sugirió esconderse aquí del peligro inminente. Con una sonrisa galante, preguntó si la niña estaba tan preocupada por él. La joven respondió que le había salvado la vida, y esto es solo gratitud. Habiendo examinado cuidadosamente cada esquina, Xianxiahua dijo que actualmente no hay peligro aquí. Se ofreció a acostarse y se fue a su cama. La chica gentilmente le permitió subir al suelo. Y por conveniencia, podría tomar una manta para sentarse más cómodamente. La luna brilló por la ventana, y Egu cuidadosamente miró la luz amortiguada. Pensando en silencio, Xianxiahua abrió los ojos y admitió que no podía quedarse dormido. El sueño no vino. Ella le preguntó si realmente le estaba mintiendo todo este tiempo y tiene algunos secretos. El joven preguntó por qué la niña piensa que sí. Xianxiahua respondió que sucedió demasiado extraño. Y era realmente tan estúpida para creer que una persona común puede ser tan genial. El tipo admitió que realmente tiene algunos secretos, pero no puede decirlo todo. Xianxiahua estuvo de acuerdo y dijo que todos tienen sus propios secretos. Ella también tiene uno. Ella admitió que vino a la escuela por una razón. Tenía motivos ocultos. El chico pensó, suponiendo que solo quería estudiar y convertirse en una persona exitosa. Sin embargo, Xianxiahua explicó que la familia le está presionando para que se case con una persona que no ama y viene aquí para esconderse. Su conversación duró mucho tiempo, pero después de un tiempo llegó el amanecer. Los muchachos abrieron los ojos y se miraron. La mirada del W era recta y cautelosa, mientras que Xianxiahua parecía desconcertada, porque alguien tocó la puerta de la puerta. Egu, con cautela, miró la puerta y escuchó. Un hombre estaba claramente detrás de ella. La voz masculina se llamaba Xianxiahua, asegurando que el supiera sobre su presencia. La joven se levantó a regañadientes y abrió la puerta, preguntándose qué estaba haciendo este tipo aquí. En el umbral se encontraba un joven, sosteniendo un gran ramo de hermosas rosas en sus manos. Xianxiahua una vez más repitió que no se ajustaban. El tipo, cuyo nombre era Zhan Bin, objetó que sus padres ya habían aceptado su matrimonio, por lo tanto, son perfectos. La chica con irritación arrojó un ramo al suelo y declaró que ya tenía un chico, por lo que no pudo ayudarlo. Zhan Bin no creyó sus palabras y dijo que era una mentira, porque nunca tuvo novio. Al momento siguiente, fue al umbral, fingió encontrarse con Xianxiahua y le preguntó con calma qué estaba pasando aquí. Zhan Bin estaba furioso, sin creer que esta mujer podría estar con otra persona. El novio rechazado no pudo aceptar la idea de que Xianxiahua realmente cumple con algún tipo de pobreza. Mientras tanto, decidió terminar la actuación hasta el final, y se hundió en una rodilla, sosteniendo el anillo de una chica asombrada. Un anillo de oro con un gran rubí brillaba en una caja abierta, y el tipo con una mirada seria le pidió las manos. Xianxiahua sonrió, el joven la orientó rápidamente y la ayudó, lo cual fue muy agradable. Zhan Bin miró sorprendido a la joya. Rubin era enorme. El tipo apretó sus puños con ira, era insoportable. No iba a rendirse y estaba decidido a demostrar quién era el principal aquí.